Hello, everybody. If it's Wednesday, it's Warhammer, and that must mean it's time for another episode of Warhammer Weekly. Joining me, as always, is my co-host who's been having a rough time with his Nurgle. It's Tyler. What's up, buddy? How you doing?
Yeah, I've spent a lot of time in the last couple of weeks whinging to both of you privately. So yeah, I appreciate the emotional support
We're
during
here
this
for
trying
you.
time.
We're here for
Thank
you.
you.
The important part is to celebrate how right I was. That's what really matters, is for me to publicly state back when I said Nurgle was going to be in trouble and everybody thought I was crazy. But I want to celebrate
hmm
this because it's an important milestone of me once again being right and other people being
Still,
wrong. So thank
I
you.
still, I still think the rules may have been rigged there. Possibly some insider baseball.
There
That
was
that's
no
that's
inside
fine.
baseball. That was just
Not
other than the power of my brain. At any
sure.
rate, joking aside, also joining us back on the show, David. What's up, buddy? It's good to have you back.
Thank you. Good to be back.
Tonight, we are going to be discussing overused rules, those rules that are getting used just a little bit too much, and why it matters and what it means for the game and how we think it should change. Perhaps as we move and get ready, like, now's the time to start talking about 4.0, Tyler. You know that, right? Because,
Mm-hmm.
like, now's when they're going to start planning out the 4.0 books, like right now in the studio.
Yep.
Those are in the planning stages, right? So I say
Mm.
we get in on the ground floor today. So GW designers, this one's for you. Listen up. This is free now. This is just a service. You're welcome to use all of this to make the 4.0 books even better for the next go round. But before we discuss those overused rules, of course, the news. What do we got?
A 40K rumor engine.
Yep, we do
Surprise,
have that.
surprise.
And next, it's some
And
sandbags and a
next.
wall. Cool.
We had a couple war scrolls come out. Warcry. That
We
is, these
did.
are war bands, correct? Not
Yep.
underwolves.
Yep. These are
Okay.
Warcry out
All
of the
right.
new thing. David, you had said you were pretty excited about these, so I've got the
Oh yeah.
Stormcast one up. You why don't you start us off? Talk about it, these guys a little bit. What do you think here?
Yes. So I'm always excited about Thunderstrike because I've been trying to very slowly make a Necroncast Thunderstrike army. And I've had a big problem with like, well, okay, so Annihilators are like nothing on objectives, so how am I going to do anything with that? And then they come along, hey, here's some Thunderstrike which count as 18 models on the objective,
Mhm.
by which 6 models, 3 wounds apiece, 3 up save, and they've got the I count as 3 models on objectives rule on their war scroll. That was nifty. And I also play
Mhm.
Sylvaneth, as some people may know. Sylvaneth has a similar, oh my god, how do I control objectives problem. Well, now they give me this nifty little thing which I can teleport, which is just 18
Mhm.
wounds on. Admit it's got to be an objective, I think, outside my territory and the enemy's territory. You got to be aggressive with it. But I still was
Mhm.
like, okay, I have 2 pain points for 2 different armies this is meeting, which that's why I'm happy. That and my wife plays Warcry, so I can go and buy this and get my toys, and she'll let me do it.
Yeah, exactly. You get 6 little Stormcast boys here, each with 3 wounds on a 3 up save. Your champion is a little Questor Prime. These are all Thunderstrike boys, so they will benefit from the Thunderstrike rule when they die. As bad as that rule is, at least they get to roll 1 extra die, so that's fun. And yes, exactly as you said, they count as 3 on an objective. They're 250 points. Yes, that is right. 250 points. They are single. You can't double up on these. And, so you're paying 250 points for 18 wounds that triple counts on objectives. Okay, cool. Seems fine enough. I don't know that, like,
With
I'm struggling to put that in or racing to put that in, but you're right. I think it does have an interesting role. Mobility can often be a problem. It's after you drop. Go ahead,
yeah,
Tyler.
with up to 19 attacks at threes and threes, -1/2 damage. That's
Mm-hmm.
pretty good at a full size. I think these are great. Like that to me is an attractive point price. Great allies, as David said. I would happily look to put these in my list. They provide a number of potential utility roles, in the game. So yeah, I think it's a great unit.
Yep. Yeah. So good stuff. Like it. Good. Not. I'm like. I'd maybe like it a little more. I like 240 or 230. It's
Mhm.
a bit like Stormcast isn't exactly their armor save isn't worth as much anymore, is what I'll say. And we'll talk
Mhm.
about that later in the show. That's just a teaser for later in the show there. But we also got the Royal Beast Flayers. Now these guys are 10 for 115. They have 1 wound each, but that's a lie because 3 models in the unit have more wounds, 2 of them being the dogs that have 2 wounds each, and one of them being the royal guy who's in the picture, who has 3 wounds. So actually, you're getting 14 wounds for 150 points, but it is on a 5-up save. So talk to me about these guys, David. What do you like about these boys?
So prior to a little bit of an off-screen conversation, they freaked me out a little bit because I was thinking, well, you get 2 of these units for 115 points, 230 points for, like, gosh, what is that, 28 wounds? And then
They can be reinforced, yes.
Yep, exactly. And then they have those unique attack profiles on the Flaymaster and on the dogs, which give you a total of, I think, 16 swings, hitting on a number better than 5, so 4s and 3s, wounding on 3s with rend and multi-damage. So I was like, so here it's got like, it's got an elite attack profile on like goblin-pointed stuff. But then, rightly pointed out, David, it's in Flesh Eater Courts. It doesn't matter.
Right.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you double this up, you're getting 4 attacks on 3s neg 1 for 3 damage, right? And you're getting 12 attacks on 4s 3s neg 1 2 damage. Yeah, certainly a good attack. And then you get a bunch of extra attacks that are relatively garbage, right? The standard, the battled 4s no rend 1 damage, or as we call it, the AoS launch profile. And you know that's fine. But yes, it's in Flesh Eater Courts. I'm not sure this is really doing anything that they were specifically needing. Like, it's more relatively high attacking glass cannon-y type guys that die pretty easy in Flesh Eater Courts. But it continues their trajectory of units that do good damage while also being very easy to kill. So the trading game with Flesh Eaters continues, and like they are basically the last book that we don't know is coming, right? Because obviously we know Cities is coming in the here very soon, and then there's that other mystery battle tome near the end of the year. What could it be? Why didn't they just say Flesh Eater Courts? What were they?
It's obviously Slaves to Darkness.
Again. Obviously, just again, yeah, exactly. It's clearly another Lumineth book, so that's cool. They are serfs, yes, and for all the things that'll interact with accordingly, which is fun. So yeah, these guys are good.
They also have the mess up monsters ability. They reduce monster damage if they're close to it. And
Yeah, they are. Yeah, absolutely right. Their actual abilities, when it comes to it, other than the attacks, are enemy monsters can't carry out monstrous rampages while they're within 3 inches and reduce their damage by 1 to a minimum of 1. So some damage reduction. Yet another thing we'll be talking about more in detail later in the show. What a weird thing. Though this actually is, it's funny because this is going to end up being an interesting example of how rules when used in certain ways aren't problematic, but when used in other ways are. Like, this is such a perfect counterpoint to things we're going to talk about later on. Like, I love that they released this today after the slide that I put together on this subject. It is so perfectly exemplifying what we're going to talk about later. I couldn't have planned it better. So, fantastic. Okay, great. And then, yeah, they can also go faster if they have their dogs with them and there are monsters around. So, okay. Cool. Fun.
I think that's it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think we have
Just a
anything
little quick note on TMX. Don't forget, June 3rd and 4th. I think all of my classes are sold out, but I know, but there might be still a couple slots. But either way, Sam and John and I will just be hanging out over the weekend painting and stuff. We're also launching our new game. The next game from Snarling Badger Studios comes out at TMX. So if you can find your way up to Oshkosh, Wisconsin on June 3rd and 4th for TMX, the link will be down in the description for that. So go check it out. We'd love to see you there. It's going to be a real fun time. Okay. With that, gentlemen, let's transition over to some pick of the week. David, what would you like to share with everybody?
Gosh, I don't have a link for it. Maybe you do. But Sword and Steel recently did a really great video, 2 of them, but the one from this week's what I'm talking about, on how to put together the Slan, which might not be relevant to a lot of people, but when I was assembling the War Song Revenant, my first one for the first time, I missed a little detail for how something clicked in place, and I had to green stuff a whole bunch of the model to fix it. And I was like, well, shoot, I wish someone had put this together before I did. And Slan similarly has some gotchas in it, where if you don't know they're coming and you're new at modeling, it could really get you. So I liked that she put that together.
Yeah, absolutely. It was, in general, some. It's a good video. Helpful things like that for instructions are always good. So check it out. It is, in fact, linked down below. Tyler, what do you want to share with everybody?
Yeah, Eric asked in the comments, Spence, if we're going to discuss power creep. I think we will in some ways potentially tonight. We've been having some chatter in the background, at least,
sure,
on that
like,
topic.
Yeah, part of the issue is I don't really believe in power creep. So
Okay.
we'll talk about it. Like, I don't think power
Yeah.
creep is actually a thing. I think that's a figment. It's a mirage.
Okay. That would be interesting to discuss in more detail. So the Stormkeep fellas, they put together a 2.5 hour discussion on this topic, and I thought they did a good job with it. Went into a lot of detail, giving a number of different examples. Some of them certainly resonate with my recent struggles against the now Big Six. 6 of these 8 battle tomes in particular that have shot their way into the top of the meta already, with Soulblight in particular at the top of the heap right now. So yeah, I definitely have, I kicked off a thread last week, you guys may have seen, kind of laying out some concerns with where we are. I need to do a follow-up to actually get into some specifics. I wanted to just hear what other people thought before, weighting it too much with my own opinions. So that's been fascinating to see. Seems like I don't know, it's mixed feelings on it, right? I'm not the only one that's feeling this, but definitely some mixed feelings about it out there right now. So anyway, yeah, good discussion. Highly recommend it.
Awesome. Fantastic. Ben C. Yes, Eric did know who he was interviewing. Yes, and it was a very funny joke. So that was all a good time. Now, my pick of the week is going to be for our good buddy Ninjan, who put together a video. Now it's on a 40k model. It's a Tyranid, but Tyranids are organic things. It's a fairly easy thing to translate over into other projects, and it was about basically making your own color scheme and how to establish it quickly and how to go about sort of defining the color for a new army and color palette and paints and stuff like that. And I just thought he did a really good job putting it together and showing how you can just like punch it up and do some interesting things and kind of react as you're going. Go check it out. It's linked down below. Shout out to Ninjan, who always is making very funny, great videos. Yeah, there you go. Cody, where can we read Tyler's thread? I believe you did a thread on Twitter at least a couple times, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
At Scrubby and Wells.
Yep. 1B, coach, not 2 B's.
Yes.
To continue.
There we go. Okay.
So it'd be Scrooby then.
Scrooby, yeah. I'm amazed at how many people, do go. It's not just coach, but go Scrooby, yeah. Jack Scrubby and H.G. Wells.
Yes.
If you're gonna pick a couple of founders of modern wargaming or the miniature toy soldiers that we all know and love, you'd be hard pressed to pick 2 better people than those 2. Obviously, H.G. Wells with Little Wars and Jack Scrubby with his work in the 50s on essentially what created modern wargaming. Obviously, Games Workshop had a particular fellow involved early on that maybe would be worth a shout out. But anyway, yeah, fascinating history with toy soldiers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Richard Reed's. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was saying I had no idea H.G. Wells did that. I knew him as a science fiction writer, or is it a different H.G. Wells?
Nope, same guy.
One and only.
Very into little miniature wargaming. Yes, he was. Little Wars. He wrote his own rule set. Richard Reed said, "Hey Vince, any chance you're going out to Dragonfall this fall?" Unlikely. It's the thing I've always wanted to go to, but it's unlikely because it's always on the same weekend as a tournament that I'm already committed to, and that just keeps happening every year. And so I end up being actually not that far away from where it is, because where I go is Chicago, and it's just up over the border in Wisconsin. Life is funny sometimes how it works. All right, let's do some hobby time. Tyler, what have you been working on? You painting up a new army? You fed up enough with this one?
Yeah, definitely experiencing the new model, syndrome, new painted model syndrome. Apparently that is a thing, at least based on my one data point so far.
Sure.
Yeah. As David know, I have been hyped about doing a second round of Nurgle, and I'm going to have to get some more emotional support to get there. Not really feeling it at the moment. So think I need to figure out how to paint some Stormcast well. I'm looking at a pure Thunderstrike army
Nice.
Stormcast.
Ooh.
Love
Yeah.
it.
I have some stuff which might be helpful for that.
Okay.
Um,
Okay.
so
But yeah, I got a color scheme in mind, and so yeah, Vince might be hitting you up for some advice on a few things. But anyway, yeah,
Very nice.
I've been getting my butt kicked a lot. Have I mentioned that? That's been my hobby over the last few weeks.
Yes.
So yeah.
David, what about you? What have you been working on?
yeah, so I forgot the mini, so I had pictures of the mini, so I did this thing. Oh, wrong side.
you go.
Those you can't see them very well are chosen of Zinch for my Slaves of Darkness army I'm working on. I did head swaps for Zangors to get them skull faces, which I kind of liked. And gist is they were inspired by Ushapti.
Sure.
Like Ushapti. And this is all done by basically combining, instead of using grays, metallics, and you slap chop. And then you use like I used a gold on some parts, and then the rest of it's just contrast washes.
Nice.
And it took like an hour to paint this.
So you love to see it. It's fantastic.
Yes. Yeah, no, I'm super happy because I have no time for painting right now because of my newborn.
Yes, you mentioned that. That will chew into hobby time. I've come to understand. This is why I stay away from children of all kinds. I can't afford anything cutting into my hobby time. Too much productivity requirements on my time. But congratulations to you. Somebody's got to keep the human race going. So I'm happy to hear it. For myself, I finished up this girl right here. She was a lot of fun to work on. So this is Northern Wind by Big Child, and I think she came out really nicely. So there's going to be a little bit of a video on her and stuff. And this was, I think, one of the better pieces I've ever done. So that was fun. And it was just a lot of experimentation and color and different work. And I was very happy with how it all worked out. So there you go. A lot of fun there. Finished her up. And now we're on to newer stuff. And the thing I'm currently working on, I can't talk about. So there we go. But hey, we're back to that again. It was inevitable that it would happen eventually, but don't worry. It won't last forever. All right. So, with that, gentlemen, you ready to just move quickly into this and talk about the topic tonight? Overused rules. Okay. Let's get amongst it. Let me bring up here. Oop, there we go. Okay. So, overused rules. Boy, oh boy. This is going to be a discussion. By the way, as we're talking through this, feel free to comment yourself on what you think. As always, I want to see the audience ring in on this, on, sort of what you all think about the nature of the rules and stuff like that. So, okay. Let's get into a little overview. So, I'm going to adjust that just slightly. There we go. Okay. So I want to start with some just basics. I want to lay down some terms, some thoughts, just to get us all on the same page, because I feel like this kind of groundwork is important when we're going to discuss something like this. Because I don't just want to sit here and yell at the screen going like, boo, this rule, boo, boo. We'd like to give a little more thoughtful analysis than that. So, Age of Sigmar is an exception-based game. There is a set of core rules, individual battle tomes, war scrolls, whatever. The game elements create exceptions to those rules. No issue. That's how many, many, many games are designed. Not all games are exception-based games, but this is a very popular format. D&D is an exception-based game. Magic the Gathering is an exception-based game. All of these things work like that. There's a set of core rules. It says you can only do X. And then after you do X, you must do Y, right? And then some individual war scroll comes in or game element and says, but I can do X twice. Or I can do X and then I don't have to do Y, right? Or I can do X and then I do Z, or whatever. That's all we need. Okay. And so most exception-based rule sets have some kind of third rail set of rules. In other words, there's something so core to the game itself that if you touch it, if you allow something to be an exception to it, the game will go off the rails almost instantaneously and fall apart. Okay? So, these are oftentimes a little tough to identify, but effectively, one of them that's very easy to identify in Warhammer is something like setting up in combat. Right? That is a classic third rail.
Speaking my love language right off the bat here, you immediately triggered something that starts with an M that we've all come to enjoy lately. Maybe something to do with murdering. Okay,
Sure.
I like where you're going.
Yes, that's a little different because they move into combat without charging.
They move into combat. Yeah.
Yes. But things like where you can just teleport into combat or be set up in combat has like an extreme amount of power and should generally be avoided.
Right.
Now, we have broken that rule recently. It's not as though if you, and that's the thing I should say about this, it's not as though if you instantly touch it, the game instantly just dies. It's not like that, okay? It's not some fragile flower like that. It's just those third rails are really important because once you start touching them a little too much, they cause serious damage to the overall health of the game. Some rules are
Great
meant to
example of that.
Yeah, good.
For anyone, for people who used to play D&D way back when I was in college, D&D 3.5, followed by Pathfinder First Edition, are both great examples of, the first 3 or 4 times you let them switch something to a move action or a standard action or a swift action, it didn't break the game, but after about 2 years of doing that, the game was virtually unplayable.
Right, exactly, yes. Action economy in D&D is a great example. Land sort of dropped kind of things like can often be one of the rails in Magic, although that's broken all over the place, but in usually expensive ways or complicated ways or stuff like that.
Soul spells.
Yeah, like certain spells that they're gonna sacrifice extreme amounts of tempo, right? Where you can things like that. But any of these games have their own third rails, and again, some rules are meant to be bent, others can be broken. So, but they're important to be aware of, because all of the game's rules are sort of on this archery target of like perfectly fine to mess with, no issue at all, right? Mess with in reasonable amounts and you'll be okay. Be careful, you shouldn't mess with this very often. You should only mess with this in like extremely minimal amounts and very specific, careful ways, right? That's the sort of shrinking archery target I want to set in everybody's mind here, right? Like, if every unit in the game just started getting +1 to hit, it's clearly not a problem. Nothing breaks. It's fine. Units do slightly more damage. We know that's okay because all-out attack is a thing and the game didn't break. It's fine. Everybody has a good time. We all like +1 to hit. There's things to give -1 to hit as well. It just counters out. It has a natural balance on the other side. It's out there in the outer ring, right? We can just kind of throw it around all over the place, especially because bonuses to hit are now capped in 3.0. You can't ever get more than +1 total, right? You can't ever move your actual number by 1. That's a great example of where, like, of a rule that you can just go wild with exceptions, right? Okay.
Do you think -1 to hit, -1 to wound
Sure.
should be firmly part of that as well?
I think they are. Yeah, I really do think they are. Yeah. I mean, they're not always the most fun. They're kind of sucky sometimes, but they're definitely part of that. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, sure. It's manipulation of those kinds of rolls on hit and wound by 1 in one direction, right? Are absolutely just a completely fair territory to play around in when you're creating these exceptions, right? Because there are so many of them, they all naturally ecosystem themselves out, right? The only place it would get really dangerous is if you did like all of one and almost none of the other.
Yeah.
Right. If we had 20 battle tomes that could easily cause -1 to wound, and 4 that could do +1 to wound or something like that, then we might have a bit of a mismatch, right? So, okay.
Interesting.
Okay. So, so there you go. But here's why they're really important. Okay. In all of these cases, what exceptions are used in all of these games? Exceptions are used to create identity, whether it's the class and what it can do in D&D, or the color identity in Magic, or the army identity in Warhammer, right? A battle tome defines itself through the way it breaks the core rules. Do you go faster? Do you hit harder? Do you regen? Do you summon? Do you have a bunch of ward saves and hence mitigate damage in a better way, right? Like, all of these things are the exceptions that create the identity of your army. And I've long lambasted Games Workshop for not having color identity effectively. So like in Magic, there's sort of like this rough color identity to each, like to red, white, to Wooburg. Okay. Like, if you have some effect doing something, there's a natural home for that thing to exist.
Right.
Yeah. Like, if you're going to bring stuff back from the graveyard, that's either going to be like generally a green effect or a black effect, but then it can be a white effect in very specific cases. Right. So you can spread out some, but it has very specific ways it gets used. Right. So on and so forth.
What's the flowchart? Is it like these, like this? I don't know Magic, obviously.
Primary, secondary, tertiary is the simplest way to think of it.
Yeah, like what's the equivalent of, okay, this is a blue army or this is a blue-red army?
Yeah,
like,
sure.
Is there like a
100%.
flowchart that? Okay.
Yeah, you can look up like color identity rule sets and see kind of what falls in each space and what bleeds lines in between multiple colors and why. Yeah, absolutely.
And so that helps keep things in check, where it's like, correct, you don't have too much of any of black, white, if that's a thing, or blue, right, red, or whatever.
Because you need to go into these other, like every of the different colors of the color pie have their own identity and their own things they're good at and things they're not good at. Natural sort of Achilles heels. But because it is somewhat spread out, it's not as though they like at the same time you can go too far and have it like really locked into one space, and then that becomes a problem unless it's a rarefied rule. Does that make sense?
One thing which makes it interesting in Magic is that because you things have costs, and costs are associated with the color,
right,
you can soup together different things. So red's really aggressive, and black has a lot of destructive negative play experience. So you can make something which is really aggressive and has destructive negative play experience by diversifying your economy. Unless it looked like you had a counterpoint to that, Vince.
No, I was agreeing. Like, if you put it together and you make red black, you get the combination of those two things, right? You can use both of those together when you do that. And this is why I've always called for something to be a gold army in this game. But at any rate, I agree completely. You can they have that ability to start melding. Yeah.
So my thesis would be that it's tricky in Age of Sigmar. I mean, I think there's a level where you could do it, like order and destruction and death. All
correct. You would just do it at the Grand Alliance level. Yeah.
Exactly. But because you can't soup destruction into order, or I can't soup Seraphon into Sylvaneth, or at least if I can, it's very limited. Currently I can't, but because of the ally system, how much you can define along a color code wheel would end up being more limited than, say, in Magic, I would think.
Yeah, certainly. It's an absolutely great point. Like, it's not as though I'm just building a mono red deck every time I build, right? I can build red blue or red blue white or all 5 colors. I can go ham as long as I've got the money to throw down for the mana base for it, right? But what it does do is it exactly what Eric said, which is it stakes out a design space or a flavor of gameplay. And there can be different levels to this. Like, certain rules can sort of, what I mean by that is, think of the rarity of the rule. I don't mean what's printed on like the card in Magic of how rare it is. I mean like what level should this exist at? How common should this be, right? And it's exactly matching to what I was talking about with the targets earlier. Like, +1 to hit, no one needs to own that. Everybody can have that, right? Like, that's a thing. Everybody can just do that. That doesn't need to be owned by any particular thing, right? But regenning models that you lost that are dead should be like probably wholly owned by one Grand Alliance and maybe minorly explored by a second one or something like that. And to some degree, they've played in this space a little because they do so much top-down design. So where there is an alignment, like Death right now kind of does own most of the model regen, with it only being a secondary thing amongst others, until we started rallying on a 4-up everywhere, and then everybody got super regen, right?
Sure.
But I've often thought they could lock that in better. Like, and so regardless of whether or not they did that, these exceptions are important because the way that these rules are written, especially the ones we're going to talk about today, when they get overused, it dilutes the identity of the army, right? Here's your special thing. This is what forms your army, right? And what makes your army special, or what makes your army part of your army's Grand Alliance, or something like that, right? Part of a family of armies. Like, you can do this, and so can, like, you, Soulblight, do this, but so do you, Nighthaunt, or so, and so do you, OBR, whatever. Fine. Okay, cool. Got it. All the Death people do this thing. And then all of a sudden the new Ogre book comes out, and the Ogres have stolen all of that. Now, I did that as a joke, because as we all know, the Ogres never get to steal from anyone, they only get robbed from. But nonetheless, that's what I mean, right? When something's like, whoa, what? They came in and robbed our stuff. What we had that made us special isn't special anymore.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I'm curious to what degree you're feeling this, obviously, in particular with these recent 8 battle tomes over the last 90 days. The usual recency bias, etc., qualifications. But I thought Darren Watson, in reply to my thread last week, put it well, where he sent me everything. What's the name of that movie? Everything, Everywhere, All at Once?
Yeah. I've
been getting, like, you nailed it, Darren. I've been getting that feeling, certainly a lot more with these more recent battle tomes than I had in the prior 18 months with those battle tomes. But I could be off on that. But it's just, when I look at the Gits book, I see a whole lot of mechanics in that book. When I look at OBR, a whole lot of mechanics within OBR. And I don't know, it just something that stood out to me personally.
Yeah, absolutely. And Red Million, totally, they would be Jund. Yes, 100% they're Jund. Like, they're so obviously Jund. Yes. Okay. So...
Is there a 5-second version of that for idiots like me?
Jund is red, black, green in color combination. It has to do with... It often cares about, like, high power, big monsters, hunting. Okay. That's its sort of color identity. So, like, it very much fits ogres and stuff like that. There are many, like... Yeah, it's a very good fit. That'd be a fun show sometime to, like, map the armies onto their magic color names, because all the combinations have names basically now. In this current year of our Lord 2023. Okay. Anyways, so that's why it matters. Okay. So the details here matter, like how the rules are used matters, right? When we try to define is this a problem or not, it's about how the rules are used. How often is the rule broken? How available is the exception? Right? In other words, how prevalent is it? How powerful is the exception? How much is the exception part of an army's potential identity versus a vanilla rule? And how much does this lead to strong rock, paper, scissors? Right? Yeah. These are my criteria. David, what do you think of my criteria here as for evaluative measures of what we're going to talk about?
I think it's great. I just have a yes and to add to that.
Please.
Which is on the availability. You can look at it from the perspective of how common is the rule there. And a lot of rules, if they're there, the army just has access to them.
Sure.
But there are rules which are hidden behind attacks. You only get this if you take this subfaction with this artifact or this character. And I think some things superficially in some army books, Nighthaunt's a great example with the Cruel Ghast, it's available, has a reasonable tax to get to it. Whereas in Sylvaneth, No Retreat is available. The tax is so high, no one ever takes that. So I think that can push around the needle on availability in either a healthy or an unhealthy way. Many of these things which we're going to talk about, I'm going to say, yes, if it has a tax. It doesn't have a tax.
Got it. Nope, that's great. What's the cost? What's the cost of obtaining this thing? Yeah, that is an excellent addition that I should have absolutely included on this list, 100%. And how much, all that, and how much does it cost to get at the thing? You're absolutely right. You know, if it's like the most powerful exception in the world, this model has 100 attacks that do 100 damage that don't allow armor reward saves, okay? And it moves 30 inches and can run and charges 5d6 and gets an extra attack for every unit within 37 inches of it, you know, just whatever the nonsense thing you can construct is, right? Mm-hmm. But the model costs 2,500 points. It's like, okay, well, who cares? It's trash. It's trash. Mm-hmm. It's unusable, literally unusable, right? In a standard game. Probably even in a 3,000 point game or something like that. Or you can construe that however you want, right? But you get what I'm saying. Yes. So the cost matters. Absolutely. Okay.
I'll just ask you this, Todd, because I don't want to lose it.
Yeah.
At what point do you have a point in time in mind to hit the power creep discussion through this?
Yeah, we can talk about it right now at the beginning. So why, like, this is a perfectly fine time.
Okay.
Why not? Why am I not simply calling this power creep? Like these overused rules, right? Because one could look at this and say this is power creep. Because I don't think. Oh, good.
Well, I was going to say, let me just qualify, at least from my standpoint, and for example, that video that I referenced, and hearing from a number of others, again, there are disagreements. There are multiple points at which I am feeling this that we generally often refer colloquially as power creep. I'm feeling this from the points point of view. I feel that we have had a lot more sloppiness in point value placement, point value choices with these battle tomes in the last 90 days. One in particular point of consistency has been on the point pricing of heroes. Now, it could be perfectly fine, as David, you and I have discussed, to point heroes at what I think is this new baseline of point values for heroes that's been established, especially for small heroes, 9 wounds or less. If everyone gets adjusted to that baseline. But of course, when I look at the original 2 battle tomes, which of course are the 2 armies that I happen to play, so I might be feeling this even more so, personally.
Yeah, sure.
Stormcast and Nurgle, the first 2 battle tomes, I compare the point prices, and there's just often no comparison at what we've been seeing of late in my mind. So there's that, but there are a number of elements when it comes to point values. That's one piece. There are other pieces. Anyway, just to give a little context, so it's not just one strand, at least in my mind, and what I'm feeling and seeing in the game at the moment with the last 90 days of these battle tomes.
Yeah, before I go into my response, David, why don't you give I'd like you to give some of your thoughts on it. Like, let's.
You can tell
I want you to respond. Yeah, sure. Yes.
So, a simple thought and a complicated thought. Simple thought first. Broken battle tomes is not power creep. It's a broken battle tome. If you look at something that has a 60% win rate and you're looking for the 45-55% bracket, that's not power creep. That's something which is not working for some reason. Provided it gets adjusted, that's a matter of, and if edition goes on long enough, you're going to have mistakes. It only becomes power creep when it becomes codified. Now, I think there is power creep. I think there's a difference between planned power creep, is the complicated idea, and accidental power creep. And you and I have talked about this. And I could be wrong, but I really do think this is how they're balancing it. First edition, AoS 3 comes out, you set the points way up here. And you set them way up there because as you're coming out with new mechanics which are fun and interesting, whatever you're coming out with needs to be at least as fun and interesting, if not more so, than what came before. So if you're rolling a dice and it's a d20, an 11 or higher is it's fun, and a 10 or lower is it's not fun. Anytime you roll a 10 or lower, you're re-rolling that. You're trying to hit an 11 every time, but that means mathematically you're gonna have books increase in power. The way you balance that is you pull down the points of the existing armies, you push up the points of the new armies, and you attain equilibrium. And you have a certain amount of time where you can do this before finally these points can't go lower without breaking the economy of the game just in half, and these points can't go higher for the same reason. And then you reboot. And if you look at the development cycle for Age of Sigmar, it looks very much like they have a sense of we can keep balance for this long before it breaks. And those ones I talked about earlier where you have like 60% win rates, the reason those, in my assessment, are bad is because if you were to balance the scale to account for that, you would shorten drastically lifespan you have in which to play this game where you pull down points and push up points, because now you had to pull way down to here and push way up to there, and now you're at your end game a year before you're actually supposed to be at your end game. So that's just me guessing what they're doing. So.
Yeah, sure. So let me talk about why I don't think power creep actually exists. Because if it did exist, it would show in the stats. And so that's number one. And like, it doesn't. If I look at the top performing books, like on the Honest Wargamer right now, right? Like if we just pull the Honest Wargamer stats and look at the top performing armies right now at this moment, okay?
Well, Warhammer would be better. I mean, I don't think.
Sure, that's fine. You
they've
can pull
updated quite a while. Yeah.
It's not the like most recent-ish battle tomes, all literally just going bang, 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 bang. Now you do see jumps up there, like Gitz jumps way up there, right? And like at various points in time, you've like throughout all of AOS's history, you have battle tomes that just ride and stay strong for a long time. Okay, oftentimes a new battle tome will like spike and then fall back down, right?
Yeah, it's quite possible. It's obviously still early with a lot of these books, and so it's quite possible that it's happening. But I mean, for what it's worth, the top 6 right now are all new battle tomes. Slanesh Court, like I can't remember the exact order. You got it, David? Do you have the data in front of you?
No, I don't have
Oh.
it in front of me. I was trying to get it, but I wanted to, if it's all right, push back a little bit of the concept looking at the top battle tomes because of what Vince said with things spike and then they come down, and new shiny stuff sees more play.
Right.
You will naturally see in the top ones bias towards new battle tomes performing well, ideally within the bracket we want, but still well. Where I think power creep, and Vince, you might not consider this power creep. This might be exactly playing into your point. Where I think power creep becomes a problem is if you have at the bottom, all the ones at the bottom are old tomes, you have this phenomena of being left behind. Because I don't care if Slanesh 2019 is the best thing since sliced bread, as long as my Sylvanas 2019 book is playable. If it's not.
Yeah, I think there's absolutely. But here's what I'm saying, Tyler. We can argue about whether or not these last couple tomes have had things that are outside the pale or would get corrected or whatever, right? Non-FAQ tomes just don't even count to me yet. And by the way, that shouldn't be the case. We shouldn't live in a world where we have to wait for FAQs to harangue into order whatever's wrong. Okay?
Yeah. I don't know where we are with the average, but boy, does it feel quite extensive right now for that delay.
Statistically, the newest, like, the list release is not, like, just battle tome order in reverse. Right? It's not, like, when you look at win rate, it's not a Z to A of battle tome release schedule. It's just not.
Yeah.
And if power creep was a thing, you'd see something roughly analogous to that. It wouldn't be exactly that, I understand. Like, it's not as though, like, as all things, you would see a general, like, it would be a messy data point distribution on a generally increasing line, right? So there'd be, I'm not saying it'd literally be sorted Z to A like a mathematical thing, but it would be like this second most and then recent and then the fourth most recent and the first most recent and then something like that is what it would end up looking like, right? But there are books that come out and just immediately run to the middle, right? And don't ever have time at the top. Power creep, as we perceive it, to me, is nothing more than the natural extension of a bad development process. That's why I say it's a mirage. Okay? You're in the desert, but there's no water there. There is something scientifically happening that can be explained. It's not a lake. Power creep is looking at that heat, that mirage of a lake and saying that's a body of water. It's not. I know it's not. I can scientifically explain what's happening with the heat and the air and all of that, right? That doesn't mean what you're seeing is fake. Do you understand what I'm saying? Okay. Let me make this more real for you. I'll move out of my analogy. Okay. When you have a development process where you punch out 9 books in clearly a short amount of time.
Yeah.
Right? And you don't have enough formal development going into them.
Yeah.
Okay. You're going to naturally start the scatter plot will get wider. Okay. When you combine that with the fact that in exception-based design, as time moves forward, you as the designers learn and think of more exceptions to do with your game. Okay? You figure out more ways to play around with the rules and to mess with stuff. Okay? And so you start doing that. And some of those exceptions will just incidentally be quite powerful. Some will not. Like, Idneth came out, it has a high skill ceiling, but it has a very high skill floor. It basically did nothing.
Yeah.
Right? Skaven's got a relatively newish book. I don't see that tearing anything up. Same story. I love playing the army, but it's a real hard thing to pilot. Right? And on and on and on. We could pick a lot of tomes. Right? that
Well, again, my
sense to
contention
begin.
on this, as you know, is that like the premise, the narrative that I put forward, and others have as well, right, is that I'm delineating between 18 months
Sure.
and the
And this most
last
recent
90
crop of
days.
battle tomes. But then that's not
Yeah.
power creep. That's just some bad books that went through a problematic design phase, right? Power
Yeah.
creep is you're trying to point toward a systematic issue that I'm saying is a mirage, right?
Mm.
And that's not me trying to give GW like a pass. It's not. I'm actually directly saying they made a mistake there. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm saying the mistake isn't in them going, let's make this book more powerful, or accidentally, whether through malice or incompetence, making the book more powerful. I don't think that's the case. I think that's them going, let's explore design space more as we go, and then not having enough formal development behind it to rein things in line. Because when you have designers start experimenting with stuff, you'll widen the scatter plot, and it takes a formal developer to bring it back in.
Yeah.
And when you play, when you go into hustle up mode, like, I mean, hurry up offenses have a lot more interceptions or fumbles,
Right.
because they're in a hurry, right? That's what it is.
So
right.
it still feels to me like this is a show unto itself because I have so many things I want to talk about, but
Sure.
we're already obviously 10 minutes into this and that's not the main topic. But yeah, would love to discuss this in more depth sometime with you and
sure.
and some others, dude. Because
We'll
I
just
do
do a
think
whole
there's a lot.
show. Tag it for
Yeah,
a
there's a
future
lot
show.
here.
Is power creep real? That'll be a good one. Answer
Yeah.
no. Okay. Yeah, like, but ultimately that's, I don't think what you're, we can complain about this overuse of rules. We can complain about the some of the recent books having some real misses, especially on internal balance. But none of that to me says this is a power creep problem. It says to, like, Nurgle was doing really well for a really long time, vastly outperforming, by the by, most books that came after it. Okay.
Yes, particular builds in Nurgle that the Nurgle player base seem
Nurgle-
to not be
You
able
can
to put
always
down.
tell a player of an army
Sure, here it comes, David.
when a factual statement is made, okay,
Yeah.
and then they have to start being like, whoa, but here's why it's okay. Let me hedge. Hey, it's cool, man. Don't
enough.
cover my stuff. Don't cover my stuff.
I agree with you.
Okay.
They were
You can-
they were overperforming. They were
Thank you.
overperforming.
You can stop. There we go.
You and I know there were reasons.
Of course there were. Of course there were. There are, Tyler, let me let you know a secret. There's always reasons
There's always reasons
for all this. Okay. That's why we do this show.
Sure.
Wasn't there a point where bugs were close to a 60% win rate?
Nurgle, a fly spam Nurgle. Yeah, sure. Absolutely. Probably higher than if you just,
that
if
sounds
you
about right.
cut it to
Yeah.
just the actual fly spam armies, I think they were higher than 60%. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but at any rate, TP Grant.
I mean, that's why I don't talk. I try not to talk about this stuff much anymore because like it's so easy, right?
Yeah,
to
sure.
just make that claim.
Look, it's okay. You're allowed to be
Like-
salty about your toy. It's fine. That's Warhammer. It's as much a part of the hobby as anything. You
Sure.
think I'm not salty still about the last two Slanesh books we've got and how back they are?
That's
I'm
fair.
a salt lick, baby. I gotta shoo deer away from me when I go outside. Okay.
That's fair. Yeah.
So
Tyler, in
mean-
your defense, you never got to play flies before they became not flies anymore. So
Well,
sure
no,
is
I,
that.
I could have. I chose not to.
yeah, he
Not
likes.
with-
It's not his style.
It's not. Yeah. Which fine if people did, but anyways, yeah. It's a longer discussion. But,
It is.
yeah.
All right.
I
So
do. Yeah.
let's get into the specific examples
Sure.
because here we go. I want to talk about the overused rules. So having said I don't think this is a problem of power creep. I don't think overusing rules leads to power creep or is a problem of power creep or something like that, right? What I am interested in here with this is what are the examples of these things and why do they matter? Like, are they a problem? That's what we're going to answer. You ready, gentlemen? You ready to answer it? Okay. Here we go. Healing. This is my first one I'm going to start with. These are in no particular order, by the way. I didn't really organize these by like what I thought was criticality because they're all problems and we can decide the criticality. So healing is such a fascinating thing to me because this was classically very limited. All right? Like super duper limited. And it was like just not you basically didn't have healing for most of AoS in any way to really speak of. Like, of course, you had the heal a D3 wounds during your hero phase, and then a very few models had this incredible like heal a D3 wounds in the combat phase. You know, like if you fought or something, or just in general, and it'd be like, wow, this unit has really good healing, right? It can heal 2d3 wounds per round. Okay, per battle round. Now, recently, which would be like 10 wounds over the course of the game or something like that, right? That's basically what it would amount to if you're talking about the hero phase healing. Like D3 in your hero phase is about 10 wounds over the course of the game. Now, all of a sudden, we've got this new type of healing. This, you fight and you heal six, up the damage you do up to 6 wounds max, and it's getting put on like pretty powerful people, pretty powerful melee people, right? And
Board Drive,
this is the
Emperor
wrong
and Zombie
course.
Dragon, Neferata.
Yeah, that should be this course. I used
Drugs.
the wrong course. Sorry, not
Nope.
yes. Thank you very much. I caught the joke there. They're very rough. Yeah, haha. Very good, Ben. You got me. So there you go. Thank you for the correction. Yes, now you go to being able to heal 60 wounds over the course of the game. Holy crap. That is a lot different. The average army in AoS, right, is about 120 to 130 wounds. Just taken as a total. Right? That means this one model, right, can heal half the wounds of the average army on the table over the course of the game. Yeah?
Yeah.
Now, this is not been handed out all over the place, but boy, is it getting handed out more. It's spiked a lot recently. Okay? And so, my examples here, our examples are Soulblight Gravelords, basically like all the vampires. All the vampires have this incredible new 6 wound healing nonsense. Glutos also has this, right? He has the same exact rule. He has the vampire rule. Okay. OBR units, pretty solid amount of healing there, pushed out of the various and sundry leaders. And then you've got I should say Soulblight has more than just the vampire healing. They also have unit healing as well near grave sites and pulsing out from their heroes. And you've got things like Glog, troll healing, etc. Right? So there's my question. Is this a problem? Like, is it... So CW just made, I think, a potential point. In healing, do we have the problem where it's completely irrelevant until it's too much? Right? Is that the situation we're in? Where, like, traditional healing was never anything or really a problem or nothing much to speak of. It, like, once in a while, hey, some people could get some wounds back. Yay, neat stuff, right? It's a thing. Like, Nurgle has healing. I didn't mention it here, but they have one, right? At the top of your turn.
Sure.
Every Nurgle model heals a wound, right?
Yeah, sure.
Or D3 if they're near a locus.
Locus, yeah.
A fecundity, right? Is that a problem? Right? Where's the line? Is what I'm trying to get at here. David, you got any thoughts on this one? Is this one a problem right now? Are we getting there? What's the issue? What do you think?
I think in some factions right now it is a problem. I think generally it's not. I throw this into a bigger concept I shall call recursion. Playing Sylvaneth, I don't have board presence. I have to achieve board presence. I do that by recursion.
Okay.
I begin with basically, unless I'm playing Oakenbrow, very little board presence. Oakenbrow's changed that equation, so I have to maybe rethink some of these theories. The way which I was able to get that back was by, say, running bugs or whatever and having recursion. Begin with very little board presence, and you get a great deal of healing, like Sylvaneth can. No problem. I didn't have a lot. I'm using that to basically kind of... It's my way of being present in the match, is by coming back to life. But then I think when you have armies like... maybe it's premature because things spike, but Soulblight Gravelords is a 63% win rate. And I think part of that is if you make things goblin-pointed and give them this huge board presence, and you make things very, very hard to kill by making their monsters ethereal, and then you give that ethereal monster in a board presence-based army the ability to heal as much for each of those is I could heal on Durthu if I committed to it. I think at that point you start running into a problem. Not that the healing's too much, but the healing taken as an amplifier of board presence becomes too much. And I think most armies which have healing, it's either not enough healing or it's not enough board presence to be an issue.
Sure, like it effectively doesn't matter. Let's lay some groundwork here. I think we all agree that the traditional like D3 wounds in your hero phase type of healing is not causing any problem and is in fact fairly underwhelming, right? Like it doesn't really do much. You're not deciding a lot of games, right, on it. But I've played Soulblight. Tyler, I know you've played Soulblight. David, I don't know if you've had the good fortune to play Soulblight yet.
Not yet. Newborn.
That's of course, yes, no, totally fair answer. But I'll say, God, their healing feels really egregious, right? It's especially egregious when combined with sort of Neffy's spell. But even beyond that, man, that when as you mentioned, like this, it for them it's a sort of stacking situation where they're on very tough models that are capable of always hitting that 6 if they're fighting, right? And that also are then combined with an incredible board presence, right? All of that kind of stuff. And so there is definitely a combination of events here that are occurring, right? Where you're the army with like incredible board presence. Like probably, I really think Soulblight's in the running for strongest board presence. I don't think that's controversial to say. And then it just incredible recursion and regeneration. To where like most of the time, if I'm fighting them, I just don't even try to kill the Vampire Lord on Zombie Dragon. It's not worth it. There's just no world where I kill that guy. Like most armies that I'm gonna play, I just don't have unless I can get him like caught in the perfect trap. It's just not worth it. He's just gonna chew his way through everything I've got. So to me, that feels like
there are some
on the
armies
opposite
that can do
side.
it. Right.
Sure.
There are some
if you've got like some
maybe that
pig wild iron jaw and you just like slam that dude with a million pigs and he doesn't happen to have his ethereal on. Sure, great. But if he has like Neffy's ethereal buff up and he's on a 2-up, I could throw. I'll give the story. Here's the story. Okay. So I played Soulblight this last weekend. I was playing Skaven. I lured Neferata into a trap. I know my buddy watches this show. Hey, buddy, who plays Soulblight. It was a good game. It was a real good game. I thought he had me for a lot of it. But I eventually managed to lure Neferata into a trap. Now, she had her ethereal on, and she was on a 2-up save. She had 4 wounds on her, and I charged her with 1,000 points of models. Okay? And Neferata is ostensibly a wizard. Now, I understand she's also a vampire, but she is ostensibly a caster. That is her reason for being in the army. Like, if I took her spells away, I don't think people would be running her, right? And to me, that says she's a caster. I killed her, so with 4 wounds on her, and throwing every mortal wound on her that I could possibly muster. I mean, from everywhere I could design, right? I killed her on the wound. Like, on the wound I got her. Okay? And so, but if I had missed that, if one die had been, not gone in my favor, right? My opponent rolls 1 less 1. That's all we're talking about. Right?
Yep.
Then she would be at 1 wound still. Then she would have fought. By the way, all of my units had AoS strikes first, effectively. Like, I activated all 3 units before she fought. I should say that. So I had 3 swings at her. 3 units swinging at her. 1,000 points total before she activates. This is like the perfect trap. The best trap I can set with my army. I'm using half of my army on basically a 300-point hero. Right? And I had to set this up over multiple turns. Okay.
Is she 390? I thought she was quite a bit more than 300.
She is. She's a little bit more than 300.
Yeah, yes. But nowhere near what you're putting into her. I get it. Yeah.
You got it. If she had 1 wound left, she would have then immediately activated and put herself back at 7 wounds. That's what would have happened.
Yeah.
Right? She would have done the 6 damage. No problem with what I was fighting her with. So what that would have then been is I would have lost a bunch of stuff from her attacks. And she would have lost 3 wounds, being charged by 3 times her number of models. 3 times her points value. A wizard.
Mm.
Okay.
Yep.
Not that there's any justification for a 300 point model withstanding 1,000 points of models and shaking it off with basically taking 3 damage, right? So that's just like one example, and I'm not trying to hang the whole story on that. But to me, the Soul Blight healing is part of a cocktail that's just like too strong. It's just too strong. Like this new method of healing, I think, is just too much. 6 wounds per combat on a fighty survivable model is just too much.
Interject on that,
Go
if I
for
may. I agree. High level principles across the whole board. I think if they were in an army, or I think if she were in an army where you're talking about a 90 to 100 wounds on the table, like
Yeah, sure.
Night Haunt,
Sure.
it'd be totally different. But she's not in that army.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, it's going to make basically the same point. Matt Nguyen pointed this out as well. It's the context in which she exists, the ward dry, etc. These options. When you have, say, 60 zombies on the table as well, or 120 zombies, and they're doing what they're doing right now in the game. I mean, I don't think I'm going out on a limb and saying that zombies might be a little overcooked at the moment in this game.
Yeah.
With what they can do, and just the variables that are involved with zombies at the moment. So it does kind of exist within this broader context. But
Yep. I mean, here's the easy way to prove the point you're talking about. And that's why I want to evaluate these along all of that criteria, right? Is because let's pick up Neferata. Let's pull her out of Soul Blight Gravelords, okay? She's seen the light. She had a long talk with Alariel. And Alariel was like, yo, come over here. We've got these tree people. It's super cool. We're going to give you some magic sap that's going to cure your bloodlust. It's going to be fantastic. All right, so we just pick her up and we drop her wholesale into Sylvaneth. She switches sides. Okay? So Nephi is part of Sylvaneth now. Part and parcel. Her scroll is exactly the same, except all keywords that are relevant have been switched. Yeah? So she functions exactly as she does, just for the Sylvaneth army. All right? Is she
now
as much
of my army?
Is she as much of a problem in Sylvaneth as she is in Soul Blight? I think the answer to that's quite obviously no.
Ooh, I know. I think you picked a bad example.
Tell me why.
Sylvaneth right now, if you lean into it, and it's one of my favorite things to do, you're usually getting back 5 wounds from Verdurous Harmony. Your heroic rally is another 2. And then you got your 3.5 from regrowth, and then if you take the Emerald Lifestorm, it's 2. The point is, which I'm getting at, I think way too many words to get to it. Sylvaneth is already too good at that, especially to take Alariel. So then, if you put that in Sylvaneth, you'd push them past the point where their entire army is just coming back to life every single turn.
Let me tell you why I don't think it'd be a problem. Like, I get where you're saying.
Okay.
Because of diminishing marginal utility.
Okay.
All right. Because Sylvaneth is a lower wound army generally that does struggle often to hold board presence, right? That, like, sure, she can make a Tree Lord. She can make a Tree Lord ethereal. Wouldn't that be a funny thing, right? Like, yeah, that's cool.
I'd love it.
Yeah, that seems like a fun thing, right? But in the end, she's not going to have the same synergistic use. Like, that 2-up ethereal Durthu is going to be a lot of fun for that player, right? But there's a big difference between 2-up ethereal Durthu and 2-up ethereal Velasta. Okay. Like, even if that dude is just your only strike and fade target every round, as he would instantly become, right? It's still just not as impressive because, again, you're not holding any presence on the board, right? Whereas the army she's in now, that healing is happening synergistically as she's going forward with everything, right? And just consuming territory. That's why I don't think it's as much of a problem. So when I look at healing, I ask the following question. How easy it to define whether or not it's a problem? I think in most cases it's still not. But I think here's that, like, going back to our evaluative criteria, right? I think the context that healing happens in matters the most. Is it part of an army that can establish good board presence, that can put a lot of bodies down relatively cheap, right? And then restore those bodies or recur those bodies in various ways? Is it part of an army that has heroes themselves that are quite survivable already, right? And so hence this juices that just further, right? Like it's building on a strength, not trying to cover a weakness, right? And what's the cost to doing it? Nothing. You're not paying any cost for most of the healing in Soulblight. You have all the toys you want in that army at its current points cost right now. Right? There's no tax.
I'm gonna clip that. I'm gonna send that on the internet tomorrow morning. Love that.
And I think
Thank you.
I think that's the critical thing.
Yeah.
Is that there's no tax in Soulblight. You get to have all your cake, you get to eat it too, and you still have all the cake left over.
Sure.
And
I know there'll be some Soulblight players in the chat who will be like, well, I couldn't take everything I wanted. It's like, yeah, I get it. You never get everything you want, of course. When you're a player of an army, you always want more, right? Like, cue the Queen music. I want it all, right? But
I've got two locally who I'm going to hear from after this show. I know.
Sure.
With all this.
But I do think in that context, that's why the Soulblight Gravelord's healing is a problem, and Glutos isn't.
I agree completely.
Even though it's the exact same mechanic, right?
Yeah.
Because Glutos can make this like unkillable strong center of a Slaanesh army, and who cares? That's not how you win with Slaanesh, right? You win with Slaanesh by running out 55 Blissbarb archers and just killing the enemy with mass shooting damage, and Blissbarb Seekers to stop their saves and stuff like that, right? Like that's how you win with Slaanesh. It's not about having one unkillable dude sit on an objective who kind of moves around on the ground at a moderate pace, right?
Yeah.
So
I mean, I generally am aligned with this. I don't know how to say it. I'll try to say this, and we'll see how it comes across. Like Vince, David, you started in 2018, right? With this game, I think somewhere around there.
Yeah.
Before that,
Age of Sigmar 2018. I started playing back in Warhammer Fantasy Battle 7th Edition.
So we've got a few years on you. We're a few more years into be addicts, at least with AoS, right? So nearly 8 years been playing this game, just about every damn week. So you get like, I love playing Foot Off the Gas List, right? We talk about that all the time. It's interesting. Yeah, I feel like I learn a lot.
You like
in
to
trying
challenge
to do
yourself.
that.
You're a Johnny. We know.
Yes, I'm a Johnny. It's the pure Johnny play, right? Absolutely. Okay, cool. It's not whatever the heck is going on in one's brain that leads to that. That's what it is, right? It's interesting. Usually, Johnnies are looking to figure things out, and I certainly feel like I can usually figure things out. Yeah. And when I can't figure something out, now this is where I get uncomfortable talking about it, because it could come as egotistical, or like it's not intended to be that way, but it's like that's part of the interesting part to me. And like my local guys, they give me a hell of a time about this, right? Oh, Tyler's now complaining because he's losing more than he's used to. Oh, poor boy, right? It's all of that starts to come out, which could be fair, and that relates to earlier. I'm a salty Nurgle player right now. But when I have games that there are these situations that happen where, like, with 8 years into this game, thousands of games under my belt, and I can't figure it out, and I see no path, that does make me worry. And that's been my, like, it doesn't happen that often, but that has happened so far consistently with this healing mechanic within the context of everything else going on with Soulblight. Now, that could be a matter of the kind of army that I'm playing, because the only army that I played against it, I do think is going to struggle mightily with the nature of the mechanics with Soulblight right now. I'm not playing a like Starborn, Croak, Slann, right, Mortal Wound Spam, or even something that's closer to that in the spectrum. Anyway, that's kind of where I'm trying to come from with this without coming across as an ass.
Yeah, no, I get it. Let's summarize on this one and then move on to the next one. But here's where I think I'm living with healing right now and overused rules. I think this is a problem in Soulblight more than anything else. Maybe a little bit on the troll front, but I don't think it's actually that much of a problem. Trolls have their own pretty strong weaknesses. Like, that dude's pretty hard to kill. He's a pretty tough boy, but that's probably okay. But I think we're on the precipice with this one. Like, I think we've got to really... We've seen this mechanic start to repeat, this 6-wound healing thing start to repeat. And I worry about the problem of that in the future, if that repeats more. Like, if something shows up in cities that's healing this amount, I'm going to have some real questions, okay? But I have full belief that, like, when Flesh Eater Quartz comes out, they'll have this mechanic. Or something analogous to it. They've classically been a pretty healing intense army. Right?
Yeah.
Flesh Eaters could easily stumble into the same problem. Right? Where we just have, like, incredible recursion just happening everywhere. And stacking with, like, heroes healing while the units are recurring. With Soulblight, I think it creates a soup where it tips over the edge. Right?
Agreed.
Yeah.
I think it's a points problem with them.
The reason, and Galactic Foggy, the reason why I'm saying, or Froggy, I'm sorry. I apologize, Mr. Frog. The reason I'm calling it Soulblight as a whole is because the healing is tied up with all their other stuff. Right? It's tied up with the board presence. It's tied up with the fact that the heroes are tough and the vampires are so strong and powerful. It's tied up with the units being able to restore lots of models. And then like, you mentioned, Tyler, in one of your games, the dude was just like, I'll purposely fail the battle shock test. Like, I'm not gonna use Inspiring Presence. I could,
right.
I'm just not.
Yeah.
I'm gonna let the unit explode so I get the unit back and can set it now 3 inches away from your unit somewhere else on the board. I'm effectively just teleporting my unit because I was going to have less than 30 dudes or 20 dudes or whatever the half strength is if I use the Inspiring Presence. So why not just let them die, explode, and then teleport the unit somewhere else?
Right, and potentially immediately start contesting, like,
and immediately
at least with like
objective. Yeah.
Right. That's part of the issue with the 3 that I've been experiencing. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like this damned if you do, damned if you don't. You invest. I mean, we haven't even talked about Veracos 5-up board zombies, but you invest to try to kill 60 zombies, and anyway, yeah, it's just the whole package. Again, I'm gonna hear it from our Soulblight players.
To zoom out, though, I think that. I'm sorry, I know we're trying to move on, but to make it not so much just bashing on Soulblight, they're the example. If anybody had this board presence and this level of healing, it doesn't matter what it is, it would be problematic.
And that's my fear isn't actually Soulblight, because it's not like I think they're just way beyond the pale. Okay, like suddenly they're going to start running 80% win rates or something. I don't think that's the world we live in. Right? Like, let's not be hyperbolic. This isn't like a hair on fire thing, right? Like, this is all stuff that can be corrected through points or otherwise, right? Like, step 1, change Neffy's spell. That would be a good start. But like, my fear is this keeps going, right? It has nothing to do with Soulblight, that we continue to see this. Imagine putting that, like if they think this is a mechanic that has gas in the tank, because you might say, well, Vince, but they wouldn't do that. Well, D3 wound healing got pretty popular. We started handing that out like everywhere. More or less every army can have the D3 wound heal in your hero phase thing. That doesn't belong to any faction or army, right? Yeah. So if we decide this is the new path for healing and start handing this out in some way, because you can reflavor this a million ways, right? Like, the next time you get an orc book, you could have orcs doing the same thing.
Yeah.
Strength from victory, right? The orcs get bigger and stronger and their renewed vigor to fight whenever they kill enemy models. Feels pretty orky to me. Yeah. Right? When they kill models, they heal up to 6 wounds because they're just like, let's go, wah! Right? Like, yeah, sure, that's a super orky mechanic now all of a sudden, right? So, like, we could just start handing this out like candy, and that would scare the living crap out of me. That's more what I'm saying.
Yeah,
right.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Okay.
Cool.
All right. Cool. So that's healing. All right, next up. Hey, here it is. You knew it was coming. We couldn't leave it behind. This particular piece of crap rule. This is 4+ rally, folks. Restoring models is a powerful tool, as we just talked about. We were talking about healing, but this is slightly different because healing is often referred to as just like on a model's wounds, not really restorative. The game is paced for most non-aggro armies to not be able to deal wounds equal to the total of the enemy. Like, that is to say, if you math out on average when combat is engaged and how much damage all the units do and how many units are going to be in combat, most of the time you don't end up with non-aggro armies blanking the enemy force by the end of round 5. Right? Okay. You do some number less than like 130 wounds. Right? Now, aggro armies will do that. Okay, so like highly destructive armies will do this. You know, Ironjaws can lift an enemy force if they set up stupid and let them get like massive pig charges into everything and call the wall in one turn and like go supernova. right? Right.
Mhm.
So like there are super aggro armies that can hit that bar, obviously, right? So rally's very powerful. You can do it in both hero phases, assuming you're not in melee. Restoring models vastly changes the tempo and pace of the game, right? And 4+ rally is letting you restore half of your lost models in each phase. In one unit, right? There's the old cap. Well, theoretically, one unit. With a cap, even with a cap of 10 wounds, it's still very powerful, as that's 10 wounds back potentially each hero phase, right? Now, obviously, you could roll a little low, you could roll a little high, blah 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 blah, of course, right? But it really does just completely, like, once you set something that was pretty controlled, like everybody talks about the example of rallying a dragon back or something. I literally
Sure.
couldn't care less.
Yeah.
Roll the die, man. If you want to spend one of your precious command points to roll a
Mhm.
die for the 6, and then to the moment you get a dragon back, I'm gonna high five you right along. Okay?
Yeah.
Because what a terrible use of your resources. And the fact that it somehow paid off for you is great. Because on average, you don't even restore 1 per game doing that, right?
Sure.
Assuming like it's going to take the dragon a certain amount of time to die. Right? I'm assuming he doesn't die in like round 1. Okay. So, but when you move it to a 4-up, whoa, does that math turn on its head. Now, this gets especially worse when this starts getting multiplied out. Right? It's 10 wounds per unit, right? Now, once you can start rallying multiple
1.
units,
Yeah,
2
whatever.
for 1,
Yeah.
3 for 1, boy, oh boy, now we get into real, now we're in real dangerous territory, right? 4-up rally, bad. 4-up rally multi-triggering, very bad. Very, very bad.
Mm.
Okay, like I'm not holding back on this one. I'll say that's over the line. It is completely over the line. I should not be able to put 30 wounds back on the table for 1 CP. I know
The only
that
one
sounds
that's-
like a bold statement,
Yeah.
but I
I
believe
know
it.
that Gitz Moonclan is doing that right now. You could do it in Iron Jaws with Art Boys. Like I think that was the OG of 4+ rally in this game, which is kind of ironic because nobody cares about Art Boys doing it. But yeah, other than those 2 examples, can you guys think of anything else that can?
Our boys are on a. They're not on a 4-up. They're on a 5-up, aren't they?
I think they're on a 4-up. Yeah,
Pretty sure it's
I'd have
4.
to check.
Okay, maybe
Yeah.
so. Maybe so. I don't remember off the top of my head. I never play Ard Boys, which says a lot.
So
Exactly.
No.
I don't agree.
And there is another example, by the by. Just real quick.
I was gonna say I don't agree with the extreme. The extreme. I don't agree with everything which you said, Vince. Obviously, but
Please.
to kind of play off of what you're saying, like, there's a real concern here. If you took, for example, the Seraphon Battle Tome, their all
Sure.
blood can double issue a command point, and then if you say we're going to release a Underworlds hero who has a 4-up rally, everything within his banner gains a 4-up rally, right? And now, so he issues it to them, they get it. You could have it basically if this gets munchkined into armies which can multi-issue commands, or if it gets adapted into it, I think that Gits having a triple rally, not a problem, because it's pretty rare and it's on a pretty weak world scale. Same with Ard Boys. But I think there is something to be said specifically for multi-issuing a 4-up rally specifically. If that becomes common, which I don't think it currently is, 4-up rallies are. That's a different conversation. But
Sure.
the trip issue, if
You
that
are right.
became
Ard Boys are a 4-up.
common,
Sorry.
if that became common, then I think Vince's point would absolutely, I would have no quibbles about that at that point.
Okay,
It's not
I don't
something
think
I'd want
that.
to see.
Hold on, I got to jump in here. The Moon Clan thing is not behind a wall of any kind, nor is it rare. It's just a thing you can do under the light of the bad moon if you're Moon Clan.
So, yes.
And you have pretty good
clarify.
control of the moon now.
Yeah, so actually that was a sort of another thought. In the grand scheme of the game, right?
Sure.
We don't have a lot of people doing this. In that sense, it's not common. But in the sense of Gits doing it, they don't have any kind of tax to get access to it. They just are Moon Clan, they're in the thing, they get it.
And like
That
it's a real
and
problem when it comes to the Squiggy Moon Clan units, which is who's getting this ability,
yeah,
right?
I think that the nerf to rally brought them more in line. I think that's represented in their win rate coming down a bit. But yeah, no, I mean, I was going to say, generally speaking, my sense on a 4-up rally is it needs to be behind a steeper tax than just a blood secretor or a steeper tax. Like, say, for example, if they had to take, they got it if Scragrot was alive.
Sure.
You have to have Scragrat, he has to be alive, then you get it. That would
Sure.
be, I think, a reasonable tax for them to have it. The issue is they always have it, no matter what, for free.
Yeah, so this is where we need to talk about like prevalence and gating and stuff like that, because this really matters here, right? Who's getting it? Who can receive it? What do you have to do to get it? Now, here's my personal sense of the thing. Okay. Yeah, that is correct, Keith. It is if a war chanter issues for Ard Boys. Okay. Here's my personal sense of the thing. 4+ rally is cancer and should be stricken from the game. There we go. I'll start with a soft position. Okay. All right. It's like we can talk about places it's less problematic. All right. You know, we can say, look, things like these particular elements that are behind a big tax. Let's not worry about like the multiplying it out. Slanesh is the other example of who can multiply it out because they can repeat command abilities 3 times. Okay.
Do they have a way to do 4-up though?
No, but they don't have a 4-up rally,
right.
but they can triple rally in case
Sure.
you're looking for just that kind of thing.
Right.
But the issue is it's just too much darn healing for a game that shouldn't be putting this many models back. Like, units are meant to die. Let me spoiler the point of this game. The primary loop of the game in Age of Sigmar is I attack you, your stuff dies, or maybe I kill some of it, maybe all of it, and then you attack me and my stuff dies. That's the primary loop. Okay? That's it. That's why we play Warhammer. It's not more complicated than that. Okay? Now, we've gussied it up with objectives and a whole bunch of other fun ways and fun things to do and battle tactics and all that. I'm here for all that. But the primary loop of the game is I kill your stuff, you kill my stuff. Let's see who has more stuff. Right? Who can get to the good place. It's a tempo trading game. That is at the core of Warhammer, always has been. Since the earliest editions. Okay? This really jacks with that. Because it's like, I kill your unit. Now you don't want to fight me. You retreat away or pull your models out of combat. Then you rally. You restore half it back up. Then you come in and fight me. Then blah, 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 blah. And units just don't die. And we're just sitting here. It encourages much more static board states. Now, there are degrees to this, of course.
Yeah.
Like, super aggro armies hitting can still blow through it. And, you know, blah, blah, blah. Fire Slayers are a good example of where people do this too much. Or where this becomes very attrition-y based. You give it to an attrition-based army that was meant to stick around and die slowly anyways. And now you're in a real nightmare situation. Right? Where just those little short idiots never leave the table. Okay. So again, there's degrees, right? Like if you have it in just an article like with KO and yeah, okay, maybe it's more controlled, it's whatever or something, right? It's less bad. I'll grant you it's less bad and that we're dealing with a spectrum. But my point is the spectrum never crossed into good. It's just here's neutral. Everything on a 4+ rally exists somewhere over here. From like nightmarish apocalypse to like annoying.
Yeah.
Right? But it's never in like somewhat nice to a real pleasure. That's my
so. Yeah, go ahead, David.
I was going to say, I think it touches on something, which I think is kind of a common ground, but it's also where I would build a counterpoint. Not a strong counterpoint, but a counterpoint nevertheless. It's a negative play experience.
Sure.
I worked hard to accomplish a thing, and you took my thing away. And a negative play experience, no matter what, is going to feel bad to the person on the other side of it. To some people, it's going to feel even worse, depending on what their psychogenic profile is. I like giving out negative play experiences. I don't mind receiving them, but my
Well,
little
you're a
brother
Sylvaneth player, so that's
hates
obvious.
them. Yeah, right? Exactly. But in my defense, if you do something to Jack with me, if you're playing black and I'm playing black, great, let's screw with each other. Like, it's
Sure.
fun to me. If that becomes prevalent, if negative play is everywhere, it becomes a real problem.
Sure.
But I do think behind the right gate, the kind of negative play experience which a 4-up rally represents can play an important role in the ecosystem, in that you get hyperlinear aggression armies. If you can survive them, which a lot of times people with the 4-up rally where it's problematic can, and negating their primary win tactic of choo-choo into you,
Sure.
it becomes a very meaningful thing which brings balance to that ecosystem.
Okay.
So I do think there are rarefied and big all caps rarefied scenarios where a 4-up rally is healthy for the game state. There's no scenario where it's not a negative play experience.
It's an interesting counter argument. I like that. I think I'll buy that, actually. I think I buy your argument.
Hey.
Like and I think I could get on board with that. If this stuff was more properly gated to sort of these limited things where it was part of the armies, as you said, like their play style was to counter the choo-choo train armies, right? And that's like their path to victory, as it were, right? And it was constrained in its usage. That means either behind attacks or limited very strongly to only certain units that are meant to survive in that role or something like that, right? Then you're right. I think it could be part of a healthy ecosystem. I'll buy that, right? In the same way that like various and sundry poisons have medicinal purposes when used in the correct mixes or part of the correct tinctures or whatever, right? Yes, sure. I'll buy that. Like it's a valuable poison. Don't eat it straight, you die, right? But when used properly, it can create a healthier mix. Yeah, I think that's a good argument. I will buy that. So I will absolutely accept that caveat onto my thing. Yes. Tyler, what do you think
And
about
your
all this?
analogy holds. It is poison. It's absolutely a negative play experience.
Yeah, sure. But your point is that doesn't necessarily immediately make it bad, and I am forced to admit that. Like 100%. I'm with you. Okay.
Yeah. A few things come to mind. So one, because you especially, but we in general, I feel, have talked about this a lot for a long while now. I do regularly hear from people saying that you guys need to stop complaining so much about 4-up rally. And I ask, okay, why? And one of the common critiques has been that, well, it just doesn't tend, in their experience, it doesn't tend to have the outsized impact that we seem to be claiming that it has. And one of the thoughts that I've always had on that is, I mean, it's kind of, we often talk about the notion of first principles, like, and I just, from that point of view, as a first principle design, I'm against this more than for it, I would say. And then you take the potential that it opens up, the potential for outsized impact. Like the odds of it happening, how high do those odds have to be for me to think it's a poor idea on the surface? I really like your point, David, but I generally do find it to be too high, particularly when we're talking about this on, often it seems, some very powerful units in the game. It's not just the 4-up rally, but it's, hey, 4-up rally with one of the most undercosted units in the game at the moment, which is Thunderers at 135 points, with everything that Thunderers are doing.
No, sure.
It's
Thunder is a
that
great
coming.
example. The classic Doc rallying bow snakes at the height of the bow snake, at Marathi and the bow snakes.
Sure,
They're at
yeah.
the height of their world tour, right?
Yeah,
Like,
and maybe it's fine now with the variables of Doc are quite expensive. Their win rate has gone down for a reason. We've talked often about how it's an army of screens and hammers. You have to play well to do well with that army. You have to play very
Right.
well, and it's easy to get caught out, get a double turn, lose your very vulnerable, precious key units like your 15 bow snakes. But yeah, Blood Warriors, I think, are, I'll just say it, I think they are undercosted right now at 190 relative to, again, my prior sense of the baseline of where we were in this game. And I look at Blood Warriors and everything that they can do. Well, they're, of course, rallying on a 4-up with the Blood. So it's just, that to me is where, yeah, that's one of the elements that I see in terms of why some of this does have an outsized impact more than I think it might otherwise if it weren't on these types of units.
Yeah.
And sorry, go ahead.
No, I think that's exactly right. To me, the answer here is that 4+ rally not only causes this sort of tempo pacing issue and is an NPE sort of moment, right? Because you don't really have any way to interact with it. Like, you attack the enemy unit. In many cases, they can pull their models so that they're out of combat. Not always, but they can often do that, depending on what we're talking about here, just the size of the unit. Certainly, this often happens with things like Blood Warriors or Thunderers or stuff like that. They'll set up properly so that happens. And if they can pull it and pull themselves out of combat, they will do so. If not, they'll just retreat and then rally on the next turn, right? And it's hitting these like extremely potent units, or in the case of the Moon Clan where it's tripping off, it's either hitting extremely potent units, i.e. the Squig Boys, right? Like the Bounders and the Bounders and Hoppers.
The Hoppers.
Yeah. Or, in other words, it's hitting extremely efficient models, right? Who already do have their own recursion as well, because once they finally die, half that unit's popping back out.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Or it's hitting extremely elite models that are extremely costly to remove, right? So when you can very often sort of either nearly or completely undo a lot of the work that was done against that unit and sort of reset the game state to where like a lot of dice have been rolled and not much has really been accomplished, that to me is a problem, right? So like
it's a fascinating discussion on this in particular, because there is such divergence in opinions that I've certainly experienced over the last year that we've been discussing this, or 18 months, however long we've been discussing this. So, but yeah, I tend to come down where you're, Vince, and I loved your argument, Dave, on maybe
Thank you.
an element of value, but
All right.
Well,
So
element of value doesn't change that Blood Warriors rallying on a 4-up is awful.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean,
Awful.
we've just got a lot of examples right now in the game of like units that are clearly quite strong, right, in and of themselves. As printed, the number of models and wounds you get for the points is an efficient, solid choice. Thunderers, Blood Warriors, whatever. You pick your thing here, okay? Bounders, right? Or Hoppers. Like, it's already a good unit. Like, take the rally out of the equation, people would play this unit, right?
Sure.
It would be a valid choice that would be part of armies. It is already efficiently costed and worth it. And then you stack on top of it that now, in many cases, it will be able to get half of its lost models back every time it's out of combat for a round. And suddenly you're getting, effectively, a lot more wounds. Right? That's really the challenge, is like mathematically balancing that becomes very hard. Because if that unit of Blood Warriors isn't 20 wounds, if it's effectively 30 or 35 or 34 or something over the course of the game, that's a completely different proposition.
Yeah.
Right?
There's also... Sorry. You go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt. I had a little bit of lag. That's all.
So Alex Gonzalez rallied my unit to Hoppers yesterday and did not really do much. Yeah, Alex, I mean, again, that's a lot of what I've been hearing people say, right? But trying to make that point about outsized impact. Maybe that's more the case, like we're capped at 10, so you're getting 5 back, but they're not on a 3-up save. So maybe that's part of the issue and compared to some of these other examples. But yeah.
So I was actually going to basically speak almost directly to that. Irrespective of whether Hoppers or Bounders or whatever Squig you're bringing back is imbalanced, I don't have a strong opinion on that. When you have something like a Blood Warrior, where you can easily get them rolling 3 dice for every 2 wounds they have, if you run Gorgas Cool, or they're running 2 for 2, and they're doing mortal wounds on a 5, that means that every one of those guys, when they die, is doing a mortal wound. Which means if you're killing them in melee, which most times you are, you're literally paying wounds from my army to kill wounds from your army. Then when those wounds come back, you start getting not a linear return, but an exponential return. The same thing with Thunderers, because they're a ranged unit. So you start getting my army goes up in board presence, your army goes down by way of killing my army with the Blood Warriors. Those things, and I don't know if Squigs are that, are where this goes, to my mind, from being a negative play experience to just being, if you look at the math, it is breaking the game.
Right. Yep.
Interesting.
I think that's an excellent point. Yeah. Agreed. A very, very well stated point. Okay.
Thank you.
Multiplying CPs. Well, speaking of which, let's get right into it. Okay. So, some of the most powerful exception-based rules in the game are basic command abilities, like the basic thing we all have access to are still some of the most powerful things we can do, right? We all know rally, redeploy, all-out attack, all-out defense are just some of the best things you can do. I mean, raise your hand. People at home, raise your hand. I can see you. Don't worry. I'll know if you have your hand in the air. Also, while you're here, hit like. While we're just having this very feisty discussion. I'm watching all the chat go by. So like, hey, great commentary, great discussion tonight, everybody. Keep the chat alive. Keep going. I'm loving all this feedback in the chat. I've been watching you all discuss this. And like, hit like and subscribe and do fun things. It helps other people find the show. But these are some of the most powerful things. Like, right, we know it sucks when you get roared. Right? Like, who likes getting roared? Because all-out defense is one of the best things you can do. Right? So on and so forth. And that's why there's so many restrictions on using these things. Right? On CPs. Same unit can't issue more than one. Same unit can't receive more than one. Your CPs are a very limited resource in most armies, right? Like, they clearly recognize the power of this thing. Yeah. And just like, this is very tamped down. Right? And yet, recently we have seen an absolute explosion. This has happened a lot over the course of 3.0. Of these multiply out ability. And when you do so, it scales exponentially in power. Like, rallying 3 units is more than 3 times more powerful than rallying 1. Okay?
Checks out.
All right. Like, this is where the Slaanesh Pretenders thing comes in, right? Like, it is wildly strong. Now, it's on a body to use it that doesn't matter too much often. I mean, you can issue a bunch of all-out attack to a bunch of different bliss barbs is the way to do it. But that's not how I play it. Like, I play it to mess around and play the melee version of the army that I want to play that's bad. But that's still not a defense of the thing, right? I would just prefer to not have that rule and have, like, actual good rules on a melee army that's supposed to be a melee army. But hey, what do I know? Maybe just let me write the book next time. I'm sure I could do better. And you got the Mega Boss, you've got the Slaanesh Pretenders, you've got the Gitz Moon Clan Rally, you've got the Cruel Boys like Vulture Boss thing, you've got Skaven with Thankful, he can double dip. There's a lot of double and triple dips. Right? This is just a smattering. I could even... there's no way I could list all of these here, but it's a lot of it. You have the recent... what's the recent Seraphon one we covered? What was that? It's like, they can issue it 3 times, but the first 2 don't cost them anything.
That sounds right. Yeah.
That's it. That's it. No, that's what it is. It's to skinks only, but I mean, it's to half the army only.
Yes.
This is my shock face. Skink, yeah.
Yeah, okay. My favorite bad implementation of a rule. Like, the fact that got through development just blows my mind. Like, somebody didn't read that and go, so this army just gets 2 free command points a turn? Is that what we're doing here? Is that just the rule? Because that's what you wrote. Did you know you wrote that? Okay. Cool. At any rate.
David, if I go to hell, David, the gates of hell are going to be manned by skinks. I'm convinced.
Oh, they will. They will. Yeah. I mean, I'm smiling because I think I'm the odd man out here. I think that rule's hilarious and I love it.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
We can keep going.
I think it's an absolute silliness, but hey, there we go. Yeah, exactly. Same with Pretenders. 6 CP a turn and the triple commands are free. Yes, exactly. That's the funniest part about Pretenders. You'd think in this triple subfaction or this triple issuing subfaction, CPs would be rather limited. Nope. You're just swimming in them. You're up at like 6 to 8, 9, 10 command points in a battle round. It's wild. Yeah. You're just like, I just can't get enough, baby. Just drop them.
Also, dude, I feel like
we are.
Yeah.
It's more of that kind of stuff that I'm talking about events when I'm whinging about the last 90 days than necessarily, I mean, yeah, it's some of it's power creep, but it's just this feeling of sloppiness compared to what we were praising for 18 months for the most part with how good these battle tomes were. And I look at the Slaanesh book and great, it's one subfaction. And not only that, but it's layers of ridiculousness. And it's just all shooting for the most, like, it's just wild.
Yeah. Okay. So let's stick to multiplying CPs. Is this a problem? Let's ask the question. David, I'm going to start with you this time. I'm not going to form an opinion here. I jumped out real strong on the last one. Is multiplying CPs a problem? Is this an overused rule in a bad way?
If you strike rally from the list, I really love this rule, and I don't think it's bad. Because it's doing something which I love when mechanics do, which is you take this thing, something the core book is doing. Commands exist. Rather than saying, I don't issue commands, I do this other thing instead. You're saying you can do the thing which you have in the book more times. So instead of feeling, it's still an exception, but instead of it being a no but exception, it's a yes and exception.
Sure.
And it's playing with something which fundamentally most people have access to. So my sense on it would be the only time I think this becomes bad is if you start getting a really big distinction between the haves and the have-nots. And that really starts coming in on things like, well, I know I liked it, but things like redeploy, like rally, and probably forward to victory would be the ones I'd say these might be tricky if these are being triple issued versus you're talking about all out defense, unleash hell, all out attack, that stuff. I'm like, yeah, no.
Unleash hell, man. That's pretty rough.
Well-
Obviously we have a clear example right now with against Slanesh. That's just here's my castle of 33 to 55 or 66 Blitzbarb archers, right? Triple issue route. Anywhere you come into me, I'm gonna hit you. I'm going to optimize my capacity to hit you. Now, I mean, there's some opportunity
Triple
costs, but
unleash
yeah.
with 33 bliss barbs is not a great day. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I mean, I haven't played against that army, so I could be. My question would be, is it ignoring because some armies like Foythan or whatever they are in Ideneth ignore the restriction for redeploy. Redeploy, and then you just daisy chain redeploy everyone, regardless of whether or not they qualify. So if you're multiplying in a way where I can redeploy and I don't need to qualify to do it, or I can unleash hell and I don't need to qualify to do it, that can be a problem. But with unleash hell being models within 6 inches, I feel like you'd end up with a pretty small footprint where you'd actually face down 33 Blitzbarb archers all shooting you at once, wouldn't you?
It's the timing. Vince, you want to clarify the timing?
Yeah, no, go ahead. You can go through it.
Yeah, the timing is, as far as I understand how it works, right, is, okay, so I charge in with 5 Black Kings, right? And I charge into a unit of 22 Blitzbarb archers. Okay, I get unleashed hell upon by that unit. All right, that's that. I then move on to another charge, 2 Blight Lords, charge into a different unit, let's say 11 Blitzbarb archers. They would get to unleash hell as well at that time.
Okay,
so it's not all happening at once. It's just whenever it's tripped in the sequencing.
So I guess I should add a caveat with that. Linear multiplication. I do this for free, and then later I can do it again for free, and later I can do it again for free. Could be really problematic for that reason. But you have it be, when I issue all-out attack, I issue it 3 times to 3 targets. That you don't get to do it again later. You just do it. So I guess
the problem is the way most of these things work in the game, it has to work in the former, not the latter, because most of these are triggered things, right? And so they have to be able to because they can't break the triggering condition. Yeah. Right. They have to then allow you to break the timing condition effectively.
Well, in that case, you need to take Unleash Hell off of that list. Basically, all-out attack, all-out defense. Those ones to me seem fine.
Reroll charges. I mean, there's a million uses where we have of people who allow reroll charging in a big radius around. That's not like nobody's losing sleep over that, right? So yeah, clearly that's fine. If we can put auras on people left, right, and center that says everybody within X inches of me gets to reroll charges, then you can triple issue reroll charge, and it's like, great day, fine, cool. Yeah. All right.
So that's my opinion. All attack, all defense, reroll charges, great. The other ones, not so great.
Not so great. Yeah, and I think that's a good example, right? Now that's not even getting to certain interesting command abilities that some of these people may have on their own that they can issue, like that maybe in books. These have been largely stripped out of books, but not completely. So there is some overlap here where you get sometimes an interesting thing where a unique command ability can be issued multiple times, but that is fairly rarefied. Most of the time we're talking about these core ones. Yeah, Tyler, what's your take on this one?
Yeah, I mean, from a practical standpoint, I don't feel that, again, if the question is, is this having outsized impact? I know you have other criteria, of course.
Yeah,
So
is
going
this a
back to,
bad overused rule or is it fine? Where on the target
I
spectrum are we
think,
falling, right?
yeah, historically with this, it's felt a hardy Tom Lyons, it's fine. With that said, having played against Slanesh, and again, with apologies to my friend Bryce, a longtime Slanesh player, we played a game in. It was more about, I mean, obviously there's a lot of power there that is helping Slanesh at the moment, whether they need the help or not. Is this healthy for the game? It was more of the experience of how that works with Unleash Hell that I found a little crazy,
Mm-hmm.
where it required so much thought and precision in terms of trying to minimize, not necessarily gotcha, but just minimize the bad outcome, right? Like if I'm just willy-nilly charging and not thinking about what the hell I'm doing, and like sending a unit in to absorb the Unleash Hell, right? Or trying to be positioned to absorb multiple. It got into a level of detail that I found a little excessive as a mechanic. So like on that standpoint, from like an aesthetic experience, design experience, it seemed very messy to me. Having played Iron Jaws, I have certainly had the experience of people feeling like the triple issue on Iron Jaws felt excessive as well. Now, I haven't played a whole lot of Iron Jaws. I certainly haven't played Pig Spam, so I don't really have firsthand knowledge about like how impactful has that been on Iron Jaws and as an army. Generally, they felt better designed in terms of the bounds on that army to absorb 3-for-1 than maybe a lot of other examples you could give.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. It's interesting too because they're an overlap of I have a special command ability and I can trip the triple or double
Right,
use of that thing, right?
right.
As opposed to just relying on the generics. And certainly there is a core group of people who, if we did another NP survey, would probably rate Iron Jaws pretty highly for that ability to crash their whole army into you. Because for, sort of casual players or people who aren't used to that kind of thing or don't have chaff in their armies or maybe don't play armies that have the capability to take chaff and so on, it can or don't really understand how to set up properly to avoid these sorts of things. It can be an utter nightmare where the Iron Jaws are just like, oh, the whole army's in your face turn one, they're calling the wall, they're killing you, oh my god, we're all dying, this is a fun game. And so I get it, like I want to be sympathetic to those people because it's not like you're just born with some innate knowledge of how to resist an alpha strike, right? Like it's a thing that army can do.
Yeah, what I'm getting at, I made the point to you before, Vince, on the show, right? That there's a certain level of thought and complexity that I have been finding in the game increasingly, that even as an addict of nearly 8 years, I'm like, God, like the level of thought and planning and
Sure.
analysis paralysis, trying to, it's just, when I think about that in the context of a casual, I mean, maybe they're not seeing a lot of this that more experienced players are seeing, but it just seemed at times, yeah, stuff like this seems nuts to me from a
Yeah.
complexity standpoint.
Yeah. And I think the reason that when you look at like the mega boss, although strong and although painful to a certain cohort of player, like Iron Jaws, I believe are way down in like the low 40s. I'm not looking at the
Yeah,
Warhammer
like
stuff right
42% or something.
Yeah, they're
really low.
they're way
43.
down.
Yeah.
And that's because everything in the game right now is working against them, right? Like there's just everything in the game because they always have been an extremely one-dimensional force. Right? Now they can be played cleverly. I like playing them a lot. I have a lot of fun playing the army. But it's hard, man. You're like
Yeah.
you brought a hammer. You gotta hope that's enough because there are no
Yeah.
other tools in your toolbox, right? You can like use that hammer cleverly, right? But at the end,
Play more Iron Suns, people.
yeah, it's like you've got the hammer.
Yeah.
And whereas like some of this later stuff, I think not only does it there's clearly a spectrum. Like on Thankful, we mentioned earlier, David, you talked about gating things behind a cost, right? So Thankful can double issue. It's a cool ability, right? Especially in Skaven, where you often have lots of units. Like my army on, just as an example, my army on Saturday that I played was 13 drops. Okay? Great. I love slaying Skaven. I have not looked at that stupid Bat Reg battalion ever with Skaven army. That thing yeeted into the sun as far as I care, right? Like I was 13 units, 13 drops, let's go, right? I was using some Galatian command, had my Deathmaster Storm Vermin trick.
How much work did you have to do to get to 13? Or did
na-
it, we're just
all
rolled that
uni-
naturally?
it just that was a very natural emergent occurrence. It just happened because
Amazing.
I am one with the Tyler. I'm part of the council of
Sure.
13 here, so it
Yeah.
just comes naturally.
Mm.
At any rate, the point is like they're thankful being able to double issue is really fun and cool and we can do some neat stuff when you can all out attack or all out defense or something like that or double redeploy, a thing I'm very fond of doing with thankful in the Skaven army because Skaven have to live through mobility. You're like, the army's kind of bad. And so like you have to play really tricky and really use mobility to its maximum to win games, right? And so that it's fun, but it's stuck behind a 400 plus point relatively fragile model, right? Like Thankful is not that hard to remove. He's on a 4-up, 5-up. And
Yeah.
he has old school sort of healing. Like he heals a D3 in the combat phase, right?
Right.
Cool. Right. Better than in the hero phase, but still pretty constrained. So like to me, that's the way to do this. The same with the Cruel Boys Vulture boss. He's not breaking the world. That's putting it behind a relatively expensive special character. Here it is, right? And even for the Mega Boss, that's a 480 point model on the Maw Crusher to triple issue, right? And that dude has, classically no mortal wound protection. He's over there. So to me, when these abilities get put behind, I think this is the best example where I don't really think this is a huge problem as long as these things are put behind the appropriate tax. When they're put on like big, expensive, especially not super tough characters, things that have counterplay and can be removed, I'm like, yeah, that's cool. Like, go for it. That's great. Right? It's because it's giving you some kind of, I don't know, theoretical tempo advantage, I guess, or something like that, right? But like it's making your resources more valuable. But at the same time, it's not like when it's gated in such a way, you paid to get there. So you were already starting, down some degree. So I think that's fine. When it can go on like a 90 point hero who can suddenly start triple issuing or something like that. Oh boy. You run into an issue.
Yeah, I love this tax issue, David, that you brought up at the beginning. Yeah, it resonates a lot with many of these discussions here already.
You should give credit to Vince for applying it here. I agree completely.
Yeah.
That if put behind the correct gate, even coming off what I said before, even things like I think Rally on Unleash Hell would be completely fine if they were behind the right gate.
Yeah, I mean, Slanesh is a great example where it's not. Because although I do it on a Keeper of Secrets because I'm a lunatic, right, and think that that's fun, and want to play with a bad model with bad rules that doesn't do anything unless you invest your entire army into it, you don't have to do that. There are very cheap options that can be issuing that triple command, like very, very cheap. No gate that again you would take anyways, right? Like throw that rule into the sun. That unit's still getting picked for your army. Sight unseen.
Well, yeah, you have to take a hero, and you're gonna have a general. So
hold on, let me do the math. Okay, I've got one. I need one. Yeah, it works. It checks out. We've run the numbers, right? So I think that this is a good, like, the interesting part to me about multiplying CPs was how much this is often gated, and when it's gated properly, it's not a problem, and when it isn't, it instantly becomes a problem. Right. So like, whereas with the 4+ rally, what we saw is the units that can receive it are the challenge. Here, it's who is doing this? What paywall did we put this behind? Right. And I think that's the definitive trait here of when this becomes a problem. So I think they need to me, a lot of these things are like fire. They're very useful. They're very, they're like, we love fire. Fire's great. Who doesn't love some fire? You sit by a fireplace or outside on a summer evening, roasting some marshmallows, making some s'mores. Man, that's great. That's fantastic, right? Who doesn't love that? But if a fire is just randomly in the middle of your house, that's a terrible day, right? It's just like it's got to be in a controlled setting, right? And that's it. That's where this goes off the rails. So, yeah, there you go. Anthony Ferry. So I'm not the most well versed in Warhammer, but Slaanesh is good. Question mark. Where do I go to see lists? There is a very particular kind of Slaanesh that is good. It's not my kind, but it is basically a shooting heavy Slaanesh. And yes, it's pretty good. And I think Warhammer has some actual lists as well, doesn't it? On there? Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what I recall. I think I was looking at some earlier today.
Yep.
Yeah.
So.
WOE. Woe. Like
Yeah.
unleash the tide of woe, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, Anthony, we're
woe
seeing some
vis-a-vis.
list with 10 Slick Blade Seekers as well, which has been get a little melee in there, which has been nice to see, not just all shooting. So
You
but
mean
yeah,
the
mostly
only
shooting.
good melee unit in the army? Yeah. Sure.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, that poor book.
All right. Hey, 5th time's a charm, buddy. We'll get there.
100%.
All right. Cool. So that's multiplying CPs. Let's keep going. -1 damage. Oh boy, oh boy. Here we go. David, why don't you start us off on this one? Take us, like,
Okay.
what do you think about -1 damage?
Similar to commands, but all the more so. When it's behind attacks, especially when the attacks has a limited ability to project the effect,
Yep.
great. When it doesn't stack, great. And there's a big caveat, even with taxes, if you start stacking this up, I think it can just be too much. The issue is when you don't have attacks. Now, some people would say, "Oh, David, you're talking coalesce. They don't have attacks." I don't know. It's too early to say for sure. But if all of the units are pointed highly enough to have access to this, then that is attacks. So coalesce might be fine. But generally speaking, if it's behind a gate, great. If it doesn't stack, great. If you see Petrifex Elite as an example, they're an example of something which would worry me because the fact that that's when it first came out was the most played, and now I think could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that's the most played subfaction for OBR right now.
Pretty much what I've been seeing. Yeah. Immortus
and I
Guard,
mean-
Necropolis Stalkers, Catacrows, maybe Arkan, but yeah.
That's where things start kind of becoming a problem. I would question whether or not those units are pointed right, considering it's effectively the entire army's getting access to it. Versus in Coalesced, you're often going to be taking some Raptidons, a spawn of Chotek, a skink guy handing out poison, something like that. So it's not going to be your whole army. Versus oftentimes in Petrifex, armies are so small, it's the army. The whole army has it. It's basically functionally map wide, and I got it for just being this subfaction. So that's kind of where my concerns are with this.
Yeah. And I think that's fair. I think that maps onto my exact concerns as well. To me, this is one of those things that's fine when it's very constrained, right? Because where this one breaks for me is there are certain armies in the game that are largely 2 damage and have paid for that luxury, right? And like that is their win condition. Like ogres are a good example of this, but they're not the only one.
Iron Jaws. I played a number of games against Coalesced last year with Iron Jaws where I really felt this. Yeah.
Sure.
Which, I mean, I'll say more about whether that's good or bad, but that was the experience.
Sure.
Yeah.
That's another good example. Although many of their units aren't necessarily 2 damage based, but sure, I get where you're going.
Violent Fury and yeah.
Sure. But so to me, when you can turn your whole force into this with relatively no cost, i.e. the Petrifex build, right? This is where it becomes a problem because the outsized impact is so massive on some cohort of enemy armies that are like, okay, well now I just paid for nothing, right? Like what effectively happened there is you made them bring 1,200 points or 1,300 points instead of 2,000. Right? That's what's effectively happening. You're turning their army down to suddenly being like a 1,200 point force. Again, none of these things mean you can instantly win. The game is still a skill testing game. Skill still matters most of all. But boy, is that the back foot. It's hard to beat 2,000 points with 1,300 effective points, right? Whereas when this is like a aura effect on a single model that might be able to be killed or put behind, especially a spell or something. So like Soulblight Gravelord's Waste Away. I have no problem with SPG's Waste Away spell. I think it's a great spell.
Sure. Absolutely.
Right? Fantastic buff debuff they have. It's a great
Yep.
spell. Relatively constrained range. Very powerful. Suits exactly to their army. Love it. It's neg 1 damage, no problem. You got to cast the spell. You got to be in range. I have a chance to unbind. Interactive is all get out. Right? A plus. Right? And whereas here, with something like Petrifex, it's exactly what you said. It's just like, no, this is just my whole army. What you have to do to get that? Make the right choice.
Yeah, although I do, at least in my mind, looking at the Coalesced and Petrifex Elite as the two examples here, I do think there's an opportunity cost distinction that I would make between them in terms of Coalesced is giving up quite a bit more in my mind as an identity, as the nature of what they're doing, compared to Petrifex Elite, where Petrifex Elite feels a lot of like everything everywhere all at once with everything that they can bring to bear in addition to reducing damage by 1.
Is that just a factor? I don't disagree with you. I think you're actually right about that. I think you're both right about that in drawing a distinction there. I think this is a distinction with difference. And, but let me ask you a question. Is that because so many of the monsters were basically bad? and Kroiger are bad?
I don't think so.
If Kroiger and the monsters had good war scrolls and were pointed actually somewhere in the neighborhood of correct, like they're way overcosted now. Not a little bit. Like
Sure.
they're way overcosted for what's written on that scroll. Like in like a skink chief on Stegadon is basically a war crime. He's so overcosted. Somebody should be brought before the Hague. Whoever put 330 points on there. Okay, that's
like
insane.
Though.
But like, if those units were like, because in Petrifex, the choice I'm making is the reason I can do that is because all those units are good. Like Immortus is good, Stalkers are good. The things I want to take to build my army out of are good. Right? Isn't this just a function of the fact that a lot of the scrolls that you want to be taking that would benefit from this rule are just kind of overcosted or underwhelming?
You know, I was originally disagreeing with you, but there is something to it. My assessment.
Sure.
The coalesced units, the monsters, the Saurus, the Kroxagar, are priced in a way which is fair, with the caveat that they're losing the minus damage. Now, yes, we can quibble as Stegadon's obviously horrible even at that. There's going to be loser war scrolls. I'm not saying there's no loser war scrolls, but generally speaking, let's use Saurus as an example. They're priced in a way which seems fair in Coalesced. And you take them over into Starborn, you look at what Starborn's doing with its summoning, its Mortal Wound Vortex, and suddenly, oh, this is priced fair for Starborn, because that war scroll's paying a point tax for being in Starborn or for being in Coalesced. Now, there's some war scrolls you're not going to use in Starborn and vice versa in Coalesced, but generally speaking, they're paying for sins in both subfactions. The issue is that, for example, Immortus Guard, I think, are priced about right for where they are in Mortis Praetorians. I don't think they're priced right for where they are in Petrifex Elite. And if you price them right for Petrifex Elite, they would no longer be priced right for anything but Petrifex Elite.
Right. Yeah. I think that's right. It's like, I think if the Seraphon book had come out and they actually did the work on Kroiger and Stegadons, let's just take those two units, for example. Okay. Let's say Kroiger, you looked at those. Elite units like that are generally hard to be good, but it's happened. Like, it can happen. For example, the Stalkers and Immortus Guard we're literally just talking about. Okay. Let's say that, like, let me reconstruct the world for you here in this very easy way. I want you to take all of the stats of the Stalkers and Immortus Guard, and we're going to copy paste those over into Kroiger and Warspawn. Bop, bop. Just literally cut and paste. Okay? And then they're going to have the same points cost too. But I'm just etching out the name. All right?
Yeah.
Okay? And then for Stegadons, let's say they're like down 100 points and had a good monster attack profile. Like they could do real damage in some way. I'm not sure that tomorrow that's not an instant problem. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Okay. But I feel like that's underpinning all of this to some degree. Because I can get at, you know, most everything I need through this. And obviously we don't want to get into like different points costs for different sub-factions. That would instantly become a nightmare. And like if we can't get the points right now, we're not going to get them right by making them more granular. It's like craziest idea in the world. It's like, well, everybody complains about the points being wrong now. What's the solution? Make more points? No. No. Clearly that's...
Yeah.
So, like, I completely agree with your point that about Petrifex. I think, to me, the easy answer here is stop giving neg 1 damage out to entire armies. That's it. It's that simple. Like, we can argue whether or not it's bad in Coalesce, but I think that's largely a fluke of history, or one way or the other, is what I'm saying, right? Because it was bad before, when it was limited to that stuff. It happened at a point in the past, so it could be true again in the future, right? It's the same basic rule. So just stop giving it to whole armies. Just don't.
I don't know. I agree generally with that. I don't know if it was a fluke or just brilliant design, and maybe I'm calling it prematurely.
Sure.
Looking at Coalesced and Starborn, the entire battle tone seems like they put a lot of thought into making sure this thing's balanced here and here. And basically, the thesis is if you're going to put neg 1 damage in a subfaction across the army, you're going to have to write the entire book around that.
Yeah,
and
sure.
I kind of feel like with the 4 subfactions in general, that's what they did in Seraphon. And generally speaking, I don't get the sense that as much thought went into the OBR
implementation.
subfactions.
Yeah. Could be. I think, to me, I'd like to see it just stricken from the game, and as an army-wide rule. We just stop doing that. I think it's just the safe course of action. It doesn't need to exist, right? Like
the game loses nothing for losing this.
Exactly. And somebody earlier had asked, okay, Harold, isn't neg 1 damage basically a variable ward save? Why is it worse than a good ward? Okay, well, what's a good ward? 5 up? That's a good ward, right? Most people like 5 up on the right unit's a very powerful ward save, as we talked about. I mean, the Amulet of Destiny was stricken from the game, and it was a 5 up ward. It was too good for uncertain units it could go on, right? Okay. Well, if I do 30 damage to a unit with a 5 up ward, how much damage did they take? On mathematical averages, right? 20.
20, yep.
Right? Okay. So a 5 up ward is like what is doing minus what? A third damage, basically, right? But it can also apply to damage 1. Whereas minus it's going to apply very equally. There's also a lot of things that can just sort of cut through now. We'll talk about that in a moment. Ward saves in general, or reduce ward saves, or screw around with ward saves. Like, you're playing with a basic game mechanic there, right?
Yeah.
Whereas neg 1 damage, there's nothing that... I don't have anything in my ogres that overrides that says ignore neg 1 damage if I take this special unit. That's not a thing. Right? It's just blanket, it happened. And it's been factored in to the cost of the home unit to have the 2 damage. The cost of you having a 5 up ward is not factored into my brute in Ironjaws. Right? Like, it might be unfortunate if I run into the 5 up ward. Like, oh, darn. Oh, shucky darns. That's going to be hard for me to punch through. Right? But I didn't pay any extra points for that. I just know that's a thing in the ecosystem, and I can list plan accordingly for it or not. Right? Whereas my 2 damage on my scroll, I'm absolutely paying for that. And when you sap that out of me and make me 1 damage, now all of a sudden I'm overpaying by usually a pretty hefty amount, because you pay a lot to have 2 damage base on your scroll. It's not something they just hand out in most cases. Okay.
So, as a last point on this, I'm generally confused about what I think about this one, but I do lean more toward the sense that it's probably it's not a good idea. But again, it's more from a first principle point of view than anything. What about Cruel Gas Cruciators? We had, obviously, them. At one point, they stacked, but let's just take Cruel Gas Cruciators.
Problematic
they were
when stacking,
when they
fine when
stacking.
not.
But
Yeah,
why would they?
I think Cruel Guests are the perfect example of a unit now that no longer stacks, where its attacks it has limited board effect, and it's got counterplay in the sense that there's a bajillion things which can remove it. I got
Right.
very
Right.
good at killing those things because most of my opponents were Night Hunt players.
Right.
So it's the perfect example of how, if you are going to implement this, you should implement it. I think the distinction between -1 damage and most of the other things we're talking about is, while Casey is fine, if you just remove Casey from Night Hunt as a faction and maybe push around some points accordingly, Night Hunt's great. Like,
Right.
I mean, they might need to come down in points a little bit, but they'll still be great. Versus, like, I think if you, going back to another example, killed all 4 up rallies, all of them all forever, that would have in some specific situations some negative impact. For all the reasons I laid out in my earlier argument.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
So
yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
think some people in the comments really sum this up well. Like this neg 1 damage thing is again, this is like super fire, right? Because we've just seen 2 of examples of it recently. Now that's not a trend. I'm not saying I think it's going to be seen more, but boy, should it not be seen more. Number 1, like as an army-wide rule. Number 2, when you look at something like Night Haunt, as a lot of people said in the comments, Morgonk over there, it's mostly part of an army with 1 wound each, not giant wound sinks. Conditional neg 1 damage auras for a low wound army like Night Haunt doesn't seem as bad, right? Yeah, exactly, right? Whereas if this is a common thing where army-wide, many armies in the ecosystem can just be at neg 1 damage, it just shuts out entire armies from just like playing. Those armies are just straight losers, right? Their win rate just plummets.
that really resonates, dude, from a design standpoint, because that does strike me as being categorically along the same veins of shutting off wards or shutting off Stormcast, Signs of the Storm, ability to deep strike or something, shutting off allegiance abilities, like a core element of an army's design. Yeah, that definitely resonates. So, incidentally, when we do our What We Got Wrong show, which we're going to have to do at the end of this year, number 1, Night Haunt for me. Couldn't have been more wrong about Night Haunt. Down there like 39%. I thought they were going to be great. And then I'm not going to say the second thing that I got wrong because somebody has already taken. He doesn't need another victory lap. We can keep
I'll just be taking victory laps on that for a while. Don't worry, it's fine. It's all good. Okay. Willard Ward said neg 1 damage does nothing against 1 damage armies. How many scrolls have 1 damage versus multiple? It's a good question. I don't know the actual like number of that off the top of my head. But there's like clearly the number of scrolls is higher who just do 1 damage. Like certainly that is true. But this very much hurts the particular armies where they've built their foundation on that. Right.
So another thing with that, obviously I don't know the exact number, I haven't broken it out, but I can just speak from playing Stormcast, Slaves to Darkness, and Sylvaneth. All of my elite stuff, which I would consider taking, except like Draca, who I take because she doesn't do this, if it's punching through armor and getting me what I need, it's also multi-damage.
Yeah.
It's
Stormcast are another good example. Like most of your units are of any value that are your hammers are multi-damage, right? And it just shuts all that off.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yep. So, and like it just becomes like, oh, well, Stormcast are in a real rough spot because they're overpaying for their armor saves and they're overpaying for their damage. They're just overpaying for everything at this point. Like all their tricks have just like a multitudinous amount of counters in the meta. It's really unfortunate, right?
Keith, there's a lot of Ethereum technically in this category with this half the damage of each attack running up. Do you guys basically just kind of place that in the same context of Coolgas Cruciator because it's on one particular model?
It's on one particular little special dude. He can be a special boy. For the same reason Marathi's allowed to max herself at 3 wounds, right? Because you can be special characters can be little special boys, especially something like the Light of Eltharion wandering around the board at 6 inches or something as his move speed. He's just a little foot assassin. Like he is the one of the best of the worst unit types in the game. So I would very much like that guy to be special. I think he's great. And you still don't really see him. It's a real It's a real shame.
Still too many more wounds.
Foot hero stats. You know what? Sometimes they're just annoying. This one's one for me, boys. This one's just for me. But let me see if this resonates with you. Why are goblins just the equivalent of vampire lords? When did this happen?
Sure.
Okay. Now, maybe this is my grognard coming out. Maybe this is the fact that I've been playing Warhammer since the 90s. But back in my day, a Weedy Goblin did not have the same stat profile as a Mighty Vampire Lord. When you looked at them, you saw different numbers along the line. Okay? There was an obvious difference. And I used to pride myself. I was like, you know what's super cool? Is that my Skaven is so fast. Like, look at that initiative. He like only the elf lords outspeed are faster than my Skaven, right? We're so fast. You know, like, man, it's awesome. Okay? Or whatever. You had like something to be proud of. Something that sets you apart. Now, since the launch, when we got the launch of AoS and we reset the Stormcast heroes to the 5 attacks at 3. By the way, not even all Stormcast heroes have this. We call it the Stormcast profile, but really it's only the Lords that have this. There's a lot of only 4 attacks and 3 attacks, which is so pitiful now. It's as to be a joke. Like, that is a joke. Okay? That, like, there are Stormcast heroes walking around with 3 attacks on 3s, neg 1, 2. But basically, all heroes are now 5 attacks, 3s, neg 1, 2 damage. This is just it. Now, technically, the Loon Boss on foot is 5 attacks, 3s, neg 1, d3. I went and looked this up because I went and looked at all the heroes. So he's average 2. But the Loon Boss put him on something, and he's mostly 3, neg 1, 2. Okay? Whereas the Vampire Lord, 5 attacks, 3s, neg 1, 2. The Claw Lord, 6 attacks, 3s, neg 1, 2. Eat it, Stormcast heroes.
I think it's bonkers. I played against that dude a month ago. Jesus. That's a whole story, but we can move on. Good Lord.
Why is this happening? Did we just give up and be like, this is the hero profile? This is what you get. There's a complete lack of distinction in heroes. At beyond their save, which by the way is usually 3+ or 4+, right? It's not like it varies much more than that. Almost all these foot heroes are 3-up or 4-up. Now, admittedly, 3-up is a lot better than 4-up. I'm not foolish enough to say that's not a difference without distinction.
What do you mean by
that's it?
That's it. As in, like, there's no. What are you talking about? Are you talking about we should have 6-up save, we should have 5-up save, we should have 2-up save, or are you talking about like they need more abilities to differentiate, or both?
How about just different stat profiles? Like, maybe the little Weedy Goblin hero is just like 4 attacks on 4s and 3s, you know, neg 1, rend 1 damage. Yeah, maybe he sucks at combat because he's a Loon Boss and just should. Okay? Or whatever. Or give him this profile and give the Stormcast Lord more. Like, I don't care. Figure it out. But just like have some distinction there. Right? And yes, Warpstone Enjoyer is correct, who said, excuse me, Vince Ventrella, it's 17 attacks at 3s, neg 1, 2. Yes, correct. What he's joking about there is that the Smash Rat, that the Claw Lord can build a bunch of extra attacks through many different things, including being wounded. So yeah, he can end up at like a egregious number of attacks at 3s.
I disrespected him, and I paid for it dearly.
Yeah, you don't disrespect Smash Rat. Although Arch Warlock Smash Rat's my favorite. I ran him against the Soul Blight player, and the Soul Blight player was not ready for what Smash Rat had in the bag. He knew. He tried to chase me down with his Vampire Lord, but Smash Rat was too clever.
I'm sold, but I'm a Stormcast and Nurgle player who has been experiencing this every time I write a list. So, David, what do you think?
2 thoughts. The first one is, Vince, I listened to the Glutes by Gits cast you guys did, and you got to the part with the characters, and I had a realization which made me start laughing for like on and off for like an hour. It was the best thing ever. When I realized that what's happened is that the little goblins are taking so many drugs, I think they're playing Dark Souls.
Yeah, absolutely. They've leveled up.
This little guy, and there's just Chaos Lord, and the little guy's gonna kill the Dark Souls boss. And I'm like, they're just living their best Dark Souls life. And
awesome.
That, like, if I made a Gits army, it would be a Dark Souls Gits army at this point.
Nice. That's great.
But no, in seriousness, though, I think it would be brilliant if we had more 4s and 2s. Don't care where they are. 4s to hit, 2s to wound, fine. Vice versa, fine. With Ren going up or down and damage going up or down and attack numbers going up or down. You don't need to change what the end equation. You don't need to change the end equation is. If the end equation is maximum potential of 6 damage, sure. But you can differentiate it so it at least feels different when you're rolling the dice.
At the same time, I'm also okay with the end equation going up or down. A vampire lord on foot should be more dangerous in melee than a goblin. I don't care how special he is.
To be clear, I'm not against that. It's just it's hitting on two levels. It's the outcomes same. How you get there's also the same. And it's like, okay, like,
yeah.
that's
Psychos,
nice.
did they look like psychos? Psychos do not explode when sunlight hits them. I don't give how crazy they are, okay? So, at any rate, like, I don't give that's what I'm saying. Yeah, this is not like the biggest problem in the game. It's not like this is causing some massive imbalance. This just really bothers me.
Morgonk
Burn my
is
ball.
on one. Yeah. Morgonk, you're on one in the chat. I'm right there with you, man. That's part of the power creep show. He's making the point that I brought up earlier about this premise that we have a new aggregate baseline, specifically when it comes to a lot of these heroes in the game. Small heroes, support heroes. I think a lot of these are priced too cheaply relative to the prior baseline that I thought we were at over the last 18 months.
There's an obvious problem. It should only be the Gits heroes who are pointed in price.
Sure. Right. So
no one else should get this toy. Only the Gits.
Yeah. And by the way, I'm fine if you want to keep the little heroes. Like, if the little goblins still want to be on 3 up, and you just want to boost everybody else, like, give the Vampire Lord 8 attacks on 3s at -2 rend, 2 damage or something. Cool, great, that's fine. It doesn't need to be, like, the biggest difference in the world. I just want some difference where I feel like this guy is what he is. That's it. It's completely a verisimilitude problem.
Or with the way save stacking works, just give them higher rend.
Sure.
Like, if your goblins rend 1 and the vampires rend 3, boom, baby, I just cut right through your save.
Again, totally fine. I would be completely fine.
Were you like strength 7, toughness 7 back in the day, vampires?
Oh my god, vampires were so hardcore.
Wasn't something nuts?
They weren't even the highest vampires. I don't think were that high. I think they were.
Okay.
I'd have to go back and look. Like
5 and 5, maybe
5 and 5. They had they were very high weapon skill and very high initiative. I mean, maybe the
Vlad
special
was
characters.
Ridiculous though.
Yeah, I don't remember with the special characters.
Gotcha.
But like most of the time, those kind of foot units would top out around strength or toughness 6 or 5.
Gotcha.
So I'd have to go pull an old book to know that. But I mean, like, but I will say there was a very much a difference in the numbers. Like,
sure.
And I'm not asking for that. It doesn't have to be that big. Like, goblins were completely worthless in combat. Vampires were really amazing. Like, it doesn't have. I'm not asking for like the vampire lord to be a bloodthirster and the goblin to be nothing. Like, that's not what the world it needs to be. I just need some difference here. That's it. Okay, simple one, but there we go. It's fun.
Yeah.
Straight 6s, I think, for vampires is what Inquisitor said. There you go. Vampires were toughness 5 and strength 4, but could take great weapons for strength 6. Okay, there you go.
We're all over the place. That's fine. All right.
Yeah.
We'll have to look it up.
All right, next one. Turning off commands. So this basically means, as we mentioned earlier, commands are a very powerful part of the game. It's fundamental. Right? It's one of the sort of core experiences. The ability to turn off commands, hence, is one of the strongest things you can do to return back to Roar. Right? We all know Roar is the best monstrous action. It's not it's not up for debate. Everybody knows that. And boy, oh boy. And like Inspiring Presence is, arguably the most powerful thing that can be shut off. As Battle Shock can then cause cascading losses. Right?
Horgas was a favorite of a lot of competitive players for a reason.
Sure.
Along with the plus D3 that you get on top. So, yeah.
Yep. But what are our examples? The Nurgle command trait, the BOC Ravening Direflog, the Corn Bleeding Icon, the OBR Helm of the Many, or Morghast's Terror, many of the monsters, other than the Terror Geist, who ironically does not have the rule. I will not let this go. You messed up, GW. You done messed up, Aaron. I refuse to accept this. You can't make a new rule called Terror and then make a Terror Geist who doesn't have it. It's unacceptable. All right, and then you got the Bone Tithe Shrieker, the S2D Oppressor Helm, the Dock Artifact, the S2D Unmade. Like, there's lots of different ways to bite around this. Some people shut off all commands, like the Nurgle thing. Some people shut off very particular types of commands, right? Like, or only in certain phases. So there's lots of space here. We know there's lots of variance in the design, okay? Within certain range, within certain phase, all that kind of thing.
Mm.
All right. Where does this fall?
I can stab at it first. I think the general trend, there are obviously going to be exceptions to this. I think the general trend is this is, I think, in a pretty healthy place overall.
Okay.
I think turning off inspiring presence is pretty important to make that feel meaningful, provided it's behind attacks. And
Mm.
with like one or two exceptions, it is. Getting a horror geist or a horror ghast and
Yeah.
getting it so you can cast that is a significant investment to be able to turn off that
Sure.
ability.
Spells are
Um,
generally the safest place to gate a powerful ability behind, because outside of like the spell
exactly,
doms, they're usually pretty hard. Yeah.
Mm.
exactly. I think that early on, safe stacking made some pretty invincible 120 point characters, and we saw pretty quickly that being able to turn that off with Roar or with other things was pretty important.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of people who run into a negative play experience when someone redeploys onto or off of a zone which they want to control.
Mm.
And being able to turn off redeploys, if you bring that as a tool, you shouldn't get it for free. All this stuff should be, you need to pay points and build your army to use it.
Mm-hmm.
But the exception, which proves the rule, I think, is going to be that one of these things exists without attacks. Most of these examples exist behind a pretty significant either opportunity cost or composition choice or points cost you're going to have to pay to get access to that ability.
Sure. Okay. Tyler, where are you living on this one?
Oh.
I mean, you
Hmm.
certainly ran your share of stinky Nurgle bosses.
Of course. Yeah. Yeah, OP Stench. I've tried playing Nurgle lately as part of the foot off the gas. A lot of complaining to my friend David in my battle reports to him about life without OP Stench. It's not a lot of fun. Yeah, it's it feels still in bounds to me, but again with this one I don't feel very well informed. Uh, I think we're probably okay with where we are with the growing number of turning off inspiring presence. There will be instances where that will have outsized impact. That will feel rough, obviously, at times.
I gets die.
Yeah. Uh, good. Sorry. But yeah, in general, I think this is feeling inbounds at the moment, but it might be trending in the wrong direction.
Okay. So I've got a couple of thoughts on this one. I think in general, I'm in agreement with both of you. That is to say, I think where I'm at with this is that for the most part, this one's probably fine right now, but it's on the very edge of fine. I think we are definitely trending in the wrong direction with this. We're seeing the ability proliferate and become, and the tax behind doing this get cheaper and more expansive as to what your any army that pops up has the ability to shut off. Playing in more phases, shutting off more abilities, things like that, right? So
I think with this list of events, we can point to some of when I think about the corn bleeding icon right now in the game, there's no way, in general, universally, to have a say about an invocation. No way in the game to turn off an invocation, right? Unless you have a priest keyword. So that's an issue to me, but that's kind of a broader game issue that makes that one a little more problematic in my mind.
Sure. Yeah, but I think for the most part, I'm yeah, okay, it's trending the wrong direction. This line shouldn't be going up this fast, but we're not into some problem area yet. Problem area is over here, and we're kind of racing toward it, but we're not there yet. Now, let me raise an interesting point here. Everybody talks about shutting off inspiring presence, right? This new terror ability that a lot of overcosted monsters have. And also Sons of Bahamut, who are bad for other reasons that isn't really their points cost. I don't think you actually want this. All of you. We all talk about man, I wish bravery was a thing. I'm going to go ahead and say something. No, you don't. No, you don't. Okay? You don't. And here's why I know that. Play Skaven. Okay? Battle Shock is absolutely a thing for that army. Now, all my Battle Shock immunity outside of one piece, which I'm not going to use, has evaporated. And all of my units are like bravery 4 through 6 at the best. At best, I have like a few units that are 6. Most are 5.
Screaming
even-
Bell is your battle shock
No,
level?
it's that went away from
Oh.
Screaming Bell. Screaming Bell's still hot
Oh.
trash. It's the
What?
plague sensor bearer, the
Okay.
plague sensor furnace. Sorry, the
Right. Okay.
plague furnace. And in general, I'm not going to use that because it's like what's going to happen is immediately all the rats around are going to die, and then I'm going to have a 300 point model sitting on the table doing nothing that can't move because we still have that dumb rule. So in every game where I play Skaven, I lose lots of models to Battle Shock. Okay. And you know what? It's actually not fun. It super sucks. It super sucks to just have models run away at the end of the turn.
Sure.
Okay? Like,
Yeah.
you already got beat up, and then you're going to have more people run away. It's pretty crappy. So, like, I just think bravery and the way that models run is just a bad rule. And I think we've been largely shielded from how bad it is by Inspiring Presence and all the Battleshock community that floats around. I think if we were playing this game and at the end of every turn, 2 or 3 units were losing models, which is bleeding people out, people would hate it. You would all just hate it. You can say right now you wish it worked and it was cool, but like you wouldn't. You wouldn't. Okay? Nobody would like this. Nobody wants to just lose extra models, or very few people, I shouldn't say. I shouldn't say nobody. There's always a couple weirdos out there. You weirdos. But for the most part, people just don't want to just have extra models leave cuz. Right?
CW
And-
Kreiner made the point. There's a reason why 40K is changing how Battleshock works. I don't know how it used to work, but I think that's an interesting
Correct.
point.
I was going to make that exact point. Yes, I was going there. Don't worry, Murgonk. Don't worry, CW. I was absolutely going there. 40K for their next edition has wisely realized this, and now when people fail the equivalent, they're a sort of equivalent of Battleshock, right? Which isn't exactly the same thing. What happens is that unit loses its ability to contest objectives effectively.
Oh, okay.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, I like that.
And so I don't know if that's exactly the perfect solution, but like there's pros and cons to that as well. Whatever. I think it's really interesting. I'll say that. I definitely, David, agree with your gut reaction. When I learned that, my gut reaction was, well, that's very interesting. Right? Because, and I do really like it at first blush. I just haven't thought deeply enough about it to know what that actually means. Like, what are the secondary and tertiary consequences of that? But like, I'll say this: I like that a heck of a lot better than the current bravery rules in AoS.
Sean is saying it's once a unit is below half strength, they can contest objectives or receive command stratagems. So half strength.
Well, yeah, you make checks when you're under half strength. You can still succeed.
Okay.
It's not an automatic thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Kind of like that first blush.
Yeah. So
I mean, it'd be really powerful. You just implemented that in Age of Sigmar because battle shocks before you score objectives. So if you lost your battle shock check, you can't score that objective. That could be really meaningful without losing the unit.
Yeah. I just wonder if it's still too meaningful is my concern, right? Like, my concern there is, like, why I'm hedging on this one is because, boy, is that a really meaningful effect, right?
Sure.
Like, for exactly the reason you just said. Like, oh, I've got this thing locked. Oops, I rolled bad. I don't own this objective anymore.
Yeah.
That, like, it feels like with as tight as the scoring is in AoS, turning the entire game, which could be it, like one round of not like, oops, I didn't hold 1, hold 2, hold more. Right? I go from scoring 3 points on objectives to 1. Let's say it's a three objective battle plan. That's what would happen. Right? Suddenly going from scoring 5 points in the round to 3 could be the game right there.
You could make it so it's not pass fail. Like the amount you fail by, you reduce how much you count. If you're a 20-man unit, you fail by 10, you count as a 10-man unit.
Right.
That kind of deal. There's a high level though. I think you're right. I think a world where Battle Shock, maybe not exactly that, but looks like that, is a much more fun world than a world where you lose your unit.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And that's why I don't want to get hung up on the details. And Willard's absolutely correct. That rule interestingly also applies to single models when they lose half their wounds, basically.
Mm.
So like they can also suffer the same consequences, right? So I do think it's really interesting, and that kind of thing is worth absolutely exploring. Like I hope we see that kind of thing, because just having models bleed off your units when you're already getting your butt kicked, which is usually when you're failing battle shock tests, right? You don't generally make a lot of battle shock tests in combats you've sort of overwhelmingly won. Is like, yeah, and Keith Rogers is that Keith basically said exactly what I'm afraid of. That deadly terrain killed one clan rat. Oops, the other 19 don't hold that objective that has no enemies on it. Like that's the situation I'm afraid of, right? So, but like conceptually, that's going the right direction. I think actually shutting off Inspiring Presence is terrible. I think we should all just, I think basically we should just all pretend like Battleshock doesn't exist and it should go away. Or be completely reclassified into a new rule. And like, as long as we keep papering over it, the better. So yeah, I think my final thought on this one is, yeah, it's probably fine for the most part, but this needs to go on a watch list, right? More stuff like the Morghast, where it's just like, oh, if I'm within 3 inches of you with this unit that probably in the case of Morghast aren't like the best or the thing you're taking, but if that kind of ability ends up on a good unit, a really good unit, like a unit that's going to show up anyways and be mobile and want to get into combat, and it's just like, oh, I'm near you, you can't issue or receive commands.
Right.
Oh boy. Oh boy. All of a sudden we're in problem territory real fast. Like that's Nurgle, but Nurgle, it's limited to one dude.
Sure.
Put it on the incarnate.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, like that kind of thing, I think, is what I would say. Fair enough? Like, let's put it on the watch list. All right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, next up. Tyler, I'm going to let you take this one, buddy.
Sure.
Here we go. Ward removal, the ability to punch through ward saves. Ward saves have been largely curtailed from the early days. You can't reroll wards for the most part anymore. There's no more ward stacking, other than very stupid, bad printings of bodyguard rules, which still effectively allow it to some degree. And so turning off ward saves is obviously hugely impactful. And this is going to be another one where, like, well, how much am I doing it with? What am I doing it with, right? If it's just Sigvald in Slaanesh, whatever.
Right.
If it's your Velazda, it might be slightly different. I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. Hey, Tyler, what do you think? Where you feel? Where are you living on this one?
Yeah, I mean, it does. Obviously, you all know what I'm going to say. I mean, playing probably the principal army that's most impacted by this in the game right now, certainly one of the most impacted by this in the game right now, it's going to feel bad because of how prevalent it's becoming. I had a string of games where it was like 4 or 5 games in a row. My opponent had something to turn off a ward. It was like Caradron, Khorne, OBR, Soulblight, and it's just it gets a little old, right? And because it is quite impactful. Surprise. Turning off, taking away a core allegiance ability from a faction. Now, I sometimes I feel like this is poetic justice because at some point, I remember talking about, as even a Stormcast player, like, oh, this mission that, like, total commitment, or battle lines drawn that turns off, it's fine. Turning off your Stormcast allegiance ability signs, it's fine. So maybe I have it coming. But, yeah, it's rough.
David, where are you living for this?
Oh, it's an interesting balance. At a high level, I don't think easy access rules should turn off allegiance abilities. And since you have a faction, Nurgle, where that is their allegiance ability, that's not their only one. Yeah, they got the disease points, but it's a pretty significant one.
Yeah.
That's
It's
a pretty
definitely
we ain't
the
killing
victory allegiance ability.
We ain't killing anything nowadays, David. I've sent you hours of voice notes about we ain't killing anything nowadays.
Exactly.
So and it turns out we're not surviving very very well either nowadays either, and we're very slow. And I keep going.
I mean, you're kind of making my point for me though. You got this army which is all in on its ward, doesn't have very good saves, which makes me wonder: is the problem that ward removal's bad, or is the problem that having an army where its entire thing is not its entire thing, 90% of its thing
Sure.
is its ward. Is that the problem?
Mm.
Um,
Yeah.
when you combine
good
the
point.
two, yeah. So that's where I'm conflicted on this.
I think that's an excellent point of confliction, because if you take Nurgle out of this, like Tyler, let's take Nurgle out of this for a moment, okay?
Okay, I'll try. I'll try to
You
behave.
you have a different rule, okay?
Yeah.
Your rule is just neg 1 to be wounded across the board. That's what disgustingly
Okay.
resilient is, okay?
Sure.
Like that's what you get. There's no like, some of your dudes still have ward saves here or there, you know, for whatever reason, right? Like they have a 6-up ward here, there, or a 5-up ward or something like that, or you know, the hero could take an artifact for a 4-up ward or something like that, right? Like that. So like spot things still exist, okay?
Right.
Right. But your army rule is just neg 1 to be wounded. That's your thing, okay?
I don't think we've ever seen that in the game as like that's interesting. That I don't think we've ever had like a sub faction with that blanket. Okay. But yeah,
Sure,
I
but
like your heads up.
I mean, we could imagine it, right? Like,
Totally, absolutely.
You could
Yeah.
easily imagine disgustingly resilient being implemented in that way, right? I don't think we're
100%.
stretching the imagination. Okay.
Yeah.
So if that's the case, we've rewritten history. That's now the world we live in. We've slidersed over into that world. Okay.
Yeah.
It's exactly like our world with that one difference. All right.
Yeah. Got your old pop culture reference in for the night. Excellent work.
Oh, there's been so many already. But at any rate,
Okay, that's fair.
is this a problem? Or is this just like an interesting tool at that point?
Well, yeah, you put me on the spot. I love the framing of this. It's excellent. Putting me in a bind, showing the bias of the army that you play. So it would certainly be an issue with other armies, I feel, or certainly certain builds of other armies. I mean, there are other armies in the game, obviously, that are having wards as a core part of their list design and their play.
Sure.
Here I'm thinking of Lumineth, thinking of Stormcast. There's a number. That is those that are not just on 6-ups, right? But that have 5-up or 4-up.
I
Stone
don't
Guard.
usually think of Stormcast and wards. I think of Night Haunted wards.
Yeah,
Sure, like
Stormcast, like I did the
You're pointing
qualifier
toward
list
Hammers of
design, right?
Sigmar or something like that, or with
You're
Gardas.
going Gardas, yeah. It's a
Yeah.
subset, right? Not
I
necessarily
gotcha.
as a whole, yeah. But yeah, Nighthaunt is another good example with Discorporate. They can put it on 2 units at a time. I'm beating around the bush. It does lessen the issue because we are changing the reality for what just appears to be the principal army in the game right now that's being especially affected by this, let's say. Like, I think
So-
that seems fair to me.
Yes, to directly speak to the examples you brought up, I feel
Yeah.
like if we're talking artists, if we're talking Stone Guard, we're talking like you opted in, paid the faction, and then you opted
Sure.
into having the ward. If then
Right.
counterplay for the thing, you affirmatively said, yes, I want this, knowing there's counterplay. That's
Yeah.
one thing. Versus like if you're saying your entire army, the thing it does, it's not going to get to do. You don't opt into having the wards if you play Nurgle. Like that's
Right.
a thing you're gonna have and you're gonna pay for it.
Right.
So I kind of think taking Lumineth, Stormcast, everyone but Nighthaunt, and saying I think that actually becomes a healthy ecosystem. For Nighthaunt, I don't
That's interesting.
know.
Hmm.
So much of what they're doing is getting Discorporate.
Right.
But they also
Yeah.
have Ethereal. But they also have like a 39% win rate.
Right.
So-
That's because they have low wounds. Like the wards just don't go as far, right? It's not a high wound count army. So
Morgong mentioned Hearthguard Berserkers, another example.
another
Yeah,
good example,
that's-
yeah, absolutely. Where that's clearly their sort of path to victory thing, right? Like
Yeah.
Fire Slayers are their own particular interesting challenge where they really rely on those ward saves, but they also only have like 7 models in the whole range.
Sure.
So it's tough because it's not like they got a lot of choice here.
Yeah.
So, and I think, Freddie, you're exactly right. There's sort of a discussion I'm going to have about that at the end on the rock, paper, scissors becoming too stark, right?
Yeah.
The difference between soft RPS and hard RPS. And to me, this is one of those things that, like, look, we do live in the world where Nurgle has this as an allegiance ability, and having your allegiance abilities turned off kind of sucks. And
Turns out it sucks.
it turns out it sucks, yes. And I think that, like, if we're going to hand out this punch through ward saves thing, which, by the way, I do think is absolutely, like, will fall on the good side of the spectrum. And I do think it leads to a healthy ecosystem, which I think is part of what you were saying there, David. Like, in a lot of cases, this keeps things healthy, right? Because it's like you do want some counterplay to this. I think CW said, I don't think Amulet of Destiny would have been nerfed if more of this was prevalent at the time. I probably agree with that.
Oh,
like,
sure.
if we had the amount of ward punching then that we do now, who cares? Right?
Absolutely.
So
I agree with that.
Yeah, I think CW nailed it there. But, like, to me, I think you have to be careful what you hand this out to. Like, the Nighthaunt Ward Punch sub-faction is an interesting example of this. Because it's the Quicksilver Dead, right? And it's only on the Harridans. And the Harridans are a very specific unit that are, like, good at a very specific thing, but will fail at most other tasks, right? Like, they have a very specific type of unit they want to go fight. And so they're not just like...
It's called Flag Bearers.
Yeah.
Yes,
it really is. Like, that's a great matchup day for them, right? Whereas some model on, like, a 2-up save... right, is just like, okay, right, like, sure, go nuts, ladies, like, woo, we're spooky. And it's like, all right, are you done? I took a couple wounds, congratulations, now you're dead, right? Like, that's the inevitability of that one, you know.
Maybe depending on how many 9s that you roll for your -1 save stacking, etc.
Oh, sure.
Yeah,
how many times you
know
charged in? Yeah.
Yeah, and Purple Sun. I mean, they got ways to get there, but I know what you're saying. Yeah,
I mean, it's a base unit with no rend. That's what I'm saying. Right. Like, that's it. It clearly has a defined role. Same with something like the Nurgle Demon Prince in S2D.
Yeah.
That unit is average at best. I'm all like, and that is being nice. You know, Sigvald doesn't have his like deep strike anymore, right? So that's a guy who's walking across the board 6 inches at a time, right? To go get to you and kill you, right?
Yeah.
He has a combination of decent rend and no wards, but, like, he's got to get there. He's got to walk over to you and punch you in the face and play good old fashioned fair Warhammer, right? You know, when it ends up on something like the Velazda or the KO artifact or something like that, right, where it can combine with high mobility, high distance.
Yeah.
You know, effectively.
Guys, my camera glitched. I'm gonna fix it.
You're good, man. You're good. Where it combines with that kind of power projection, that's where I think we end up being in a challenging spot for an entire army, right?
Yeah.
So. Yeah,
which is a common point that we've been making, right? That there are these out of bound examples that we can point to. We made that point with Rally.
Yep.
Rally on KO Thunderers, Rally on Blood Warriors. Yeah, that really make these things feel more pronounced. And so, yeah, I think there is a world in where this can be inbounds. But yeah, it's been a little rough.
That's exactly right. I mean, I just think that if there's any take home point from this show, it's that I think that we need to be more careful about how we use some of these rules.
Yeah.
Right? Like, when we're playing with nuclear power, it's a it's a great thing, right? Like, it's amazing what it can accomplish. But we don't just sling it around. Right? You want to be careful, because it turns out you don't want that nuclear just leaking everywhere. You don't want it's bad. It's real bad, right? And some of these things are fire. Some of these things are splitting the atom.
Yeah.
Right. And so they need higher levels of control. Like, I'll give you an easy example of a counterpoint of a non-overused rule, something they have constrained themselves on, and I'm very happy to see it. And I mentioned it earlier in the show, but I'll mention it again here. Marathi. Marathi's Ironheart. It's a fantastic rule for Marathi, right?
Yep.
It's great that she has it. I love that she has it. I know it's annoying that it takes at least four turns to kill her, but it takes 4 turns to kill her. She can't heal, right? Yep. And that's it. Just get 3 wounds on her, okay? Over the course of 4 turns, just get 3 wounds on her. It's not that hard. Most anybody can do it. She's like 4 up, 6 up, right, or whatever.
Sure. Right.
You know, and in that case, they've been so constrained with that. They kept that to Marathi and Marathi only. That's splitting the atom. That rule is splitting the atom, right? If that was everywhere, we'd have a real problem in the game, right? Things would go off the rails fast. Okay.
Yeah.
If you
absolutely.
could hand that out to like Chaos Chosen,
Sure.
right? It would just be like, and we're instantly in a Chernobyl situation,
Yeah.
right? That's a meltdown. Okay. But the fact that that hasn't been the case is like, that's the kind of care we need to take with a lot of these other types of rules, right?
Yep.
Okay.
That resonates.
All right. Okay. Next up, we got a few more. We'll move a little quickly here, and so we can just get through this. Because boy, oh boy, this has been a great discussion.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh yeah.
Limiting or reducing saves. So save stacking was a large fear in the early parts of 3.0. As that has been largely eliminated, we may have swung too far in the other direction, where high save armies are paying a premium for an ability they don't get much use from. So this is Chaos Gargant, Blitzbarb Seekers, the OBR Drain Vitality Spell, the Moonface Vomit, Felwater Troggoth Vomit, the Zinch Zangor Shooters, like whatever, Skyfires. You pick your thing here. Okay, There's quite a lot of examples of this, where it's either like they get neg 1 to their save, and or they can't gain save, bonuses to save, or there's several different implementations of this concept. David, what do you think about this thing? Is it a problem?
2 things. They're contradictory. Please, sir, may I have some more? I love it. The second thing is the debuff of the same source should not stack. And generally speaking, it doesn't. But I think where this thing goes wrong is where you have, say, for example, 2 Mega Gargants. I don't think they currently stack. If they did stack,
Good question.
that's where I think you start having problems here.
Yeah.
Like 2 Chaos
and-
Gargants, you mean, and standing next to the
Yes.
enemy unit or something like that? Yeah.
Exactly.
I'll look
So
that up. I don't think they do.
You should be able to take a Shard Speaker, a unit of Blitzbarb Seekers, and a Chaos Gargant, and by using them all together, hit -3, because you're paying a premium to get that. And I like that because these make more die. Yes. I mean, there's so many things in this game right now which are based around, like, we just finished talking about Petrifex. The sheer durability you can create with save stacking. I think having universally accessible counterplay to that is really important. And that's where the please sir may I have some more comes in. But then I know there's at least some things in the game where multiple sources of the same thing do add together. And I think that you start approaching really dangerous territory with that.
Yeah, anything that becomes spammable, right? Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Yep. Okay. Tyler?
Yeah, generally more aligned as well around this, broadly defined, than where we are with wards at the moment, turning off wards. So, incidentally, David, yeah, they do not stack. It has the any keyword or the any word for Chaos Gargants, so that's good.
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
I couldn't remember.
Yeah, I mean, like, this is another context, though, as usual, where we would welcome thoughtful design in the application of this powerful space that you're playing in, right? Well, like, the Felwater Troggoth Vomit, that's a 6-inch range, unlike what, a 5-inch move, 6-inch move model? So you can play around that. Like, there are things you can do to play around that. You have... Yeah, I mean, the Moonface Moment artifact, I can't recall what all can take that. But if you have the usual running theme of tonight's show, some tax with a lot of these, I think that's a pretty good place to be in, broadly defined. So yeah, I think we're in an okay place for me personally with this. Vince, we were very hesitant to say that save stacking was a problem at the start of this game. We had a lot of conversation around that. I think where we went through a lot of discussion about, okay, if we were to do something, what would be the way to do it? And the way that we settled on was the least... We were basically in agreement. If you do the easy button answer, which is just remove the stacking altogether, that would be a bad... We would end up in a much worse place. Yeah. Which 100... Like, imagine if we're in that world right now.
Nightmare
with
world.
That. Nightmare world. So, anyway. But, yeah, I don't mind this in general.
Yeah, again, I think this is actually a good example of where they've used it correctly. This one I'll actually call a success. I don't think this is a problem right now, because I think for the most part, they've actually done exactly what you both said. This is quite limited. It's usually like on an artifact or a spell or with attacks, or you have to like take a varied selection of units and try to use them in concert in some way, which is like, yeah, that's just called how armies work, right? Like,
Lewis Bard Seekers have a 12-inch range. Like, it's not a 30-inch range.
Right. So for the most part, I think they've been quite constrained on this one, and that's good. And I do think, though, what this means, and by the way, I think we will see more of this, and I'm fine with seeing more of this. Okay. But I think that what that means is that we as they as designers and we as a community need to reset our expectations of exactly, like, especially as this proliferates out, even in constrained ways, as it should be, right? So it's on this unit that has a slow move or a short range or whatever. And I'd rather see this be like the thing I attack, not an aura around me more often, right? Again, that's another good limiter, right? So like the fact that I have to actually target you and so hit you and not just stand near you, right, is meaningful. I have to, risk it for the biscuit, as it were. So as this proliferates, I think we need to like really be careful of how valuable we point out high save armies, right? Like, is Stormcast being largely on a 3-up worth that much? Well, it's worth less every ability of this you create.
Sure.
Right. I don't know what's less. What does that amount to? I don't know, but something. I know that as this happens, they become worth less.
I remember having a difficult conversation where I was trying to explain to a new player why Durthu is not durable.
Right. Right. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And so, like, we just need to take that into account that, like, hey, that monster who can basically never get protection in any way, right, because they don't have a ward save, and the fact that they're on a 3-up and they're a monster, so they're not getting cover, they're not doing all these things, they're not hiding next to troops, they're not getting lookouts, sir. Like, yeah, they're on 3-up save, that's okay. But the ecosystem is such that they have so many counters to them now. Not just to dying to mortal wound spam, as they always have been, but also just having their save just sapped out from underneath them. Right?
Yeah, you see Mergonk's comments there about KO. I think that is a good example of potentially out of bounds at the moment with what they can do.
The KO one is interesting because they're more of like super rend buff than actually like hitting the saves. That's why I didn't put them on here. But like they're more of just pushing to a sort of extraordinary rend at range, which I understand amounts to sort of the same thing. But I do feel like KO need their whole they need a whole dedicated show to talk about.
Sure.
At some point, we're gonna have to do a KO revisited here soon. Like there's a lot to unpack there. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Here's my watch item list. Let's lightning round this. So this is my sort of just general, could be something, probably nothing. Always strikes first, always strikes last. A lot of that always worth watching. How much of that's in the ecosystem? How much am I allowed to spread it around? For the most part, it still remained pretty controlled after the bad old days of 2019. We handed it out to a whole Khorne subfaction on a conditional charge roll, and that's fine. Because they have to roll like an 8+ and it's only on the mortal dudes. And it's like, yeah, okay, cool, whatever, man. Because like it's on a charge and only when you roll an 8+, Spike checked out 10 minutes ago. Right? He's not in for that. Like that kind of randomness controlling it, nah. Get out of here, right? 3d6 charge, counter charges. I think in my mind, OBR is a good example of going too far here, where you hand an entire subfaction countercharging, as opposed to like putting it on a, say, 700 point basic god model, right? Where that's like your special thing to do, out of phase actions, bonuses to cast and unbind, especially when they get too high, and then mortal wounds on death. There is a clear range of value here in mortal wounds on death, right? Like of what exactly does that mean? How likely is it to occur? How many dice do you get to roll? What range do you get to deal it in? To me, these are all like, if I had to make a list of like things I would watch and play with carefully, these are all lawn darts. You got to be real careful or you're going to take one in the skull. So it's not as though they're problematic at the moment. It's just all of these either have at some point in the game been problematic or could be if used incorrectly. Right? David, what do you think about this list of my sort of watch items here?
I agree completely. I've seen examples of this, all of these being bad, all of these being good. The only pushback I'd give is I strongly suspect that Murderous to the Last is already out of bounds for its point ratio. Not in concept, but for how much it costs. I think it's probably out of bounds.
It's fair. It's fair. Yeah, I mean, I think there's probably already a couple examples of maybe each of these where we're like, that's pushed. That's pushed, right? It's either on the line or super close one side or the other, right? Yeah. Yeah, like Keith Rogers said, never really seen anyone complain about Stormcast. 6s on death, mortal wound. Amazing how talked about it gets when it becomes a 5-up or when it becomes multiple dice at a 5-up. But there's another trick to that though, Keith. It's not just the 5-up. It's also the range with which you can do it. Right? That also is a big deal. How far away is the unit you can hit?
Yes.
Right.
Like zombies as the obvious example right now. That's one of the issues with zombies at the moment in my mind is the fact that it's just the attacking unit. There's no limitation on where they have to be. Like there's no, you got to be within 3 inches per model or 1 inch per model. Yeah.
It's just
And
they
the
do
recursion.
it. Yep. I took my Arch Warlock had the Galatian champion ability of the in this game I played last week of the one where you don't die on a 3-up. Right?
Yep.
That thing. Okay.
Fueled by Gersh.
Yeah, fueled by Gurish Rage. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And so I went into the zombies and just smashed the heck out of a bunch of zombies with him. And then they all mortal wounded me. And I was like, okay, like I knew that was going to happen. I was just banking on rolling the 3-up. I was
Nice.
like, let's hope I don't die. Here we go.
That's pretty clever.
And I didn't die. I did roll the 3-up. And then next,
awesome.
when it came around next, he was like, well, you're going to die when you activate here. And I was like, am I? Scurry away. Whoop. Leave. Just left. Like I just killed the unit down to like 8 dudes, and I was like, "That's good enough. That's too weak now to do anything. I'm leaving. Bye. Not taking the chance. I'm out of here." So, at any rate,
funny.
I think that like that's exactly the point, right? You've got on one end of the spectrum, Stormcast, and they're like shoot up to heaven, basically do nothing, forget about it all the time because it's so worthless. Rule. You got to be within an inch. You barely ever get any damage out of it, right? And then on the other side of it, you've got zombies. Just like...
Right.
I do love that
absolutely.
Tom was thinking zombies are bad. Oh, Tom.
He's got a new #1 spot, buddy. It's taken over from Bounders.
Yeah, his worst call ever was zombies are bad. Like that is a take that has aged like the most rotten, like a fish carcass on a hot sidewalk on a sunny day.
I'm gonna call Emma.
Kombucha.
Yeah.
I got a private message from Emma after she went 5-0. She was like, "How about that Tom take on Warhammer?" Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, he might be an outlier in that bad take.
Love you, buddy. We've all had bad takes. It's fine.
It all happens.
Not that bad.
That is okay. One of the catastrophically worst takes ever, but sure. Okay. So yeah, that's the watch list. And then finally, I thought it'd be interesting to just very quickly end on like, after covering all this, what to me are the third rails, right? But now that we've had this discussion, what are actually the third rails? The third rail breakers, if they exist. Larger objective capture, like the Git Stabbas, that should be yeeted from the game. It's nonsense. It's complete nonsense. The Cockatrice's Petrifying Gaze, just nonsense. Like, didn't we fix this? We put a rule in the game that says you can never get more than -1 to hit, so that people didn't end up on 6s to hit. And then we put this monster in that said, never mind, you're on 6s to hit. Suck it. Yeah. And also it stacks for no reason. And you just keep taking bites at the apple.
Yeah. The flip side of the coin right now is the Marguerite, whatever the heck they're called, the chaos spawn that's stacked right now,
Sure.
reducing attacks. Like again, personally, I don't really care if it's good or bad, whatever. It's just again from a first principle standpoint, it's ridiculous that
Right.
that exists in the game, in my opinion. And this is the same thing I hear like every
100%
week.
Ben, that chaos spawn stack. I should have wrote him on here too. Yes, 1000%.
People telling me the Conquer is fine. In fact, it's terrible. Again, don't care. The way that it's written, it's ridiculous. It's horrific design, in my opinion.
Absolutely.
Well, I mean, that has big tell me you're in a shooting meta without telling me you're in a shooting meta vibes. Like,
Right,
Yeah,
yeah.
sure. Right.
It's fine
Yeah.
because I don't ever fight in melee. Who needs that? Who cares? Yeah, exactly. The null myriad 2+ spell ignore. It's just a bad rule. It's just a bad rule. Things shouldn't work like that. Like that's just very bad. It's not that you can't have magic resistant armies. You absolutely could. There's lots of ways to implement that. We talked about a few during the OBR show that would have been better than this. That would have been more interactive. Like this is absolutely the wrong way to go about this. Putting an entire army where it's just like, hey, do you rely on magic? Well, suck it, you're done. I guess that's it.
But it's also kind of a lose-lose. Like if I'm OBR and I took that and you didn't take magic.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's the problem with the design. It's all or nothing. Like the null myriad is that your classic all or nothing terrible hoser design, right? It's like we don't have sideboards in this game, and this is a sideboard ability, right? Like those kinds of rules just shouldn't be written. Like it just shocks me that 8 years into this we haven't figured that out. When we could have easily written a rule that was like generically useful, right? And like in this case do this, in this case do this. But there you go, and it works against magic and other things, like so on and so forth. Cool. Glad we're still there. Murderlust, the thing. Murderlust is a third rail because you shouldn't be able to just move into combat. Like, I'm sorry, but you just shouldn't. I don't care if it's too powerful or not. That's not the argument. You just shouldn't be able to Tokyo drift into combat. Like, I think getting into combat through charges, that's the way you get into combat, is how it needs to work. It's a third rail of the game. Like, I'll accept piling in, funnily. You know, like I
was going to say this.
Pile. It's fine. Like, that's just a little tricky stuff. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah,
go
ahead. Sorry, I've been thinking about this since you shared the PowerPoint with me, and I don't have a strong opinion on this, but I want to know what your thoughts are. I know we're running a long time. If Murderlust, so Sylvaneth tricked themselves out of combat on my turn, and I was thinking, so if this tricked me into combat only on my turn versus on the opponent's turn, would it be in a different place? If it was restricted, so I can't Murderlust on the opponent's turn. Put a little word, so it's only in my turn. I can only Murderlust on my own turn. Would that change the equation at all?
Sure, it would, but I think that in general, but it wouldn't change the third rail violation, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Which is, you shouldn't be getting into combat. You shouldn't be getting into combat in off phases, like in general.
Yeah.
Right. Like that's already a thing to watch. Like I had right here on my watch list is out of phase actions. Right? That's already a watch list item. So if I'm already charging or doing something in the hero phase or fighting in the hero phase, I already got to be careful about that. Now we took that and just hypercharged it. Because now I'm not even charging. I just was like, hey, what's up, man? How you doing? What's going on?
And of course, it's not the only example of where you break that third rail of getting within 3 inches. I think Bloodbind, the prayer, allows you to do that as well. And I'm not sure offhand about the Beast of Chaos ability to, however they're doing it right, where they're pulling a unit like toward a board edge, if that allows.
Oh, sure.
That to get within 3 inches either. But I mean, that's kind of an out of phase action. Yeah.
Sure.
But anyway, I just generally categorically, I feel like we learned this lesson a long, long time ago that it's a bad idea to allow these things to exist in the game.
Yep. And then finally setting up within 3 inches, relatedly setting up within 3 inches or at 3 inches. I just think is a bad thing. I don't think you should be able to set up a whole unit that close to somebody. It screws with the entire concept of the game. Like if the primary loop is go kill your friends, not your actual friends, but their models, right? And that is certainly the primary loop of the game. Then the secondary loop is absolutely like playing the board, is board control and mobility. That is absolutely the second pillar of Age of Sigmar, right? And like setting up your units and creating screens and establishing a board presence and hedging people out of certain areas and making people make choices about where they can and can't move. That is the skill testing element of the game. And once you allow people to set up within 3, there's just a difference there. It doesn't always have to be 9. Like going to something like 7 and stuff like that is fine, or 6 on it on a very specialized occasion. Sure, but there is a big difference between that and just like, here's any unit in my army that has a keyword popping up 3 inches away from you. I don't care if they can charge or not. Like, they just needed, like, existence is its own reward in Age of Sigmar, right?
Yeah. Yeah, Cody, that's a good example. Most negative moment in my Warhammer life was old Aetherwings moving to combat. That was ridiculous. I used to do that all the time. It was stupid. Warpstone Enjoyer asked about, what about 6-inch pylon? What do you guys think about that? Obviously, we've had that in the game for a while. 6-inch pylon, 6-inch activation.
I think it's a garbage rule. Go ahead, David.
If it happens on your turn, it fits pretty strong into that category of trick yourself into combat on your own turn. I'm pretty great with it. Piling in 6 inches on the opponent's turn. I mean, fine. It's not. I like 6-inch pile-in from 3 inches. I think that's a great way to do it.
Sure. Much less problem. That's fine. I'm actually 100% okay with that. My issue with 6-inch pile-in is, for some magical, stupid reason, 6-inch pile-in is run and charge and retreat and charge, all packed into one rule, right? And more. And also 6-inch pile-in, right? And also that. So it's got like 3 rules it's getting together, and like they're really careful about handing out run and charge and retreat and charge, right?
Yeah.
And they clearly view that as like a very potent ability. And yet 6-inch pile-in is just this thing they'll just hand out and just be like, yeah, sure, I guess that's fine. Just do that. I'm like, what? No.
Well, they did hand it out.
They've also 3 rules.
They've, at least, guys, my impression is that they handed it out quite a bit at one point in this game, but they've been rolling that back. It's gone from Khorne. Like, there are a number of, I'm feeling, at least in my head, there are a number of examples where it used to exist and no longer exists, which is interesting when you think about, obviously, some of the things that they're adding in other areas. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, I, like, agreed. And yeah, to me, the part is exactly what David said. The main part of it is, especially off turn, but especially like when you can do it from 6 inches away, when you can just run your unit up to 6 inches, right?
Yeah.
And again, like, especially once you've already tricked them into redeploying, right? If they've already burnt their redeploy from the turn, so you know this is a safe movement, right? You just go to 6 inches and you're like, oh, okay, I'll just do this fight. You're like cutting out the whole charge roll. It removes the whole charge roll. It gives you run and charge. You can just get out of combat the next round and re-trigger all your charge bonuses. It lets you get super deep into the enemy unit if that's what you want, right? If that's what you're trying to do. It's just like, it's such a versatile, powerful ability, and I just don't think anybody who has it is actually paying for it.
Yeah, Keith, that's a fair point. Obviously, Korg is cool, and somebody else? Yeah, Korgus. Korgus has 8 inches.
I think can also do it.
Okay, yeah, I did forget. I'm thinking, of course, the Bloodthirsters that they.
Oh, sure. No, and I'm okay. That's just it. Yeah. That's the funniest thing. Like, if it, again, that's the difference between, if that rule, like, Korgus Cole I have no problem with. His 8-inch pile-in, it exists on, like, a weird special foot hero that's got to, like, hustle his way across the board, base 5-inch move. He can still run and do his 8-inch pile-in. But, like, him coming in like Terry Tate office linebacker, just, from nowhere, is hilarious and funny, because he is what he is, right? Like, he's Korgus Cole. He can never be anything more or less than what's on that war scroll, right? So, like, again, it's the difference between Marathi having the ability or Chaos Chosen having the ability.
Yeah.
Right? It's a completely different world. Like, if Korgus Call was the only unit in the game with an 8-inch pile-in, and he has been for the most part, great, who cares? Fine. Neat. What a neat thing he can do. He's very angry. Right? And like, the game is in no way worse for that, right? Like, that's, even these third rails can be touched sometimes if you do it in a very restricted, particular high tax way. And that's exactly what you were saying at the beginning, David, right? So, yeah. Yep. All right. Cool. Well, there we go. Gentlemen.
Fun show.
That was very good. Yes. The pain train's coming. Choo choo. Yep. Korgus is great. All time great. Never take away that 8-inch pile-in. It's the funniest rule. I hope it lasts until 10th edition of Age of Sigmar. Okay. David, thank you, buddy. Absolute pleasure having you back on the show.
Oh, absolutely. I love being here, and it's a great show. So
100%. For all of you out there, hey, if you haven't already hit the like button, do so. It would be great. Everybody hit that like button, subscribe, click all the things that make all the dings. If you want to support the channel, there's lots of ways you can do so. Share this with your friends. That's absolutely free, and we really appreciate it. Comment on the video, do that kind of stuff. It helps to increase the engagement in whatever magical, crazy YouTube algorithm is out there. And if you actually want to throw some money at us, there's a Patreon down below where you can support the channel that has more focused on hobby and review and feedback and taking your next step on your hobby journey. But we'd love to have you.
Vince, I'm writing mini essays in your comments section on the show. So if anybody wants a mini essay, especially about Nurgle or Stormcat, I got them in me. Happy to just ask a simple question. I'll give you an essay.
Ask Tyler questions in the comments. Absolutely. Ask him how he feels about Nurgle right now. There you go.
Did you see that?
I see your responses. Yeah, absolutely. I read all the comments as always.
It was a little excessive.
Ben Stafford said, I'll answer this question at the end. Ben said, this is sort of a sad note to end on, but it is a worthwhile answer. Ben said, random question, Vince, have you heard anything about James Wapple? He hasn't streamed in a fortnight, bit concerned about that. Kathy Wapple, his wife, passed away. That's what happened. So that was widely shared on social media. That's the only reason I'm saying it. But yes, that's what happened, Ben. So very sad thing. I know he wants time to, obviously grieve as would be appropriate for such a tragic loss, for such a absolute pillar of the community. Okay. So, but at any rate, this is a very fun show. Thank you all for watching. Don't forget to hit that like button. Thank you all so much for all your engagement and great discussion during the show. As always, we really appreciate it. And as always, we'll see you next Wednesday.